Chapter 1437. Luoxian. Hearing this name again, Nye Tian felt the blood in his body flowing in reverse. His face darkened and his body trembled slightly. This woman used to be the love of his life, but for her own future, she betrayed him and even killed him with her own hands. Nye Tian didn't know if Luoxian felt a tinge of heartache when she killed him. But he knew that when he met this woman again, she would definitely feel true heartache. At this moment, Nye Tian no longer had the slightest bit of love for Luoxian, only monstrous hatred. Now, he had Mo Rushi and Cher by his side. Either of them was 1,000 times better than Luoxian. At this moment, Nye Tian finally understood. No wonder he hadn't heard any news about Luoxian ever since he came to the realm. She had joined the cloud-splitting divine palace, the leader of the 12 palaces, and even became a genius of the cloud-splitting divine palace. Luoxian, I really want to know what will happen the next time we meet. The corner of Nye Tian's mouth twitched coldly, and his eyes flickered with a cold, killing intent. Nye Tian, are you all right? Cher saw that Nye Tian's mood wasn't right, and she couldn't help but frown and ask softly. Nye Tian shook his head slightly, indicating that he was fine. Let's go. Although he already knew about Luoxian, Nye Tian couldn't go find her immediately. He had something else to do now, and that was to go to Nine Heavens City. Boom! However, at this moment, a roar came from the sky behind Nye Tian and the others. Then, a majestic pressure came crashing down like a river bursting its bank. It's the cloud-splitting divine palace. They're back! The crowd exclaimed. In the sky, the two-headed golden rock appeared again. The people of cloud-shattering divine palace had actually returned. Did they hear our words and come back to kill us? The crowd's eyes trembled as they said in astonishment. At this moment, Nye Tian slowly turned around and saw that the two-headed golden rock was flying straight towards him. Its violent aura swept up the dark clouds in all directions and pressed down crazily. Nye Tian's face darkened, but he had no intention of dodging. Instead, his body trembled, and the aura around his body surged out. A soaring sword aura rose from the ground and condensed into a huge sword in the air that could support the heavens. His entire body seemed to have transformed into a giant sword in an instant, cutting through everything. A wood dash! The twin-headed golden rock seemed to sense danger in midair. It raised its head to the sky and let out a mournful cry. Its huge wings shook violently, and it immediately stabilized itself in midair. The twin-headed golden rock was a rank 4 divine beast, equivalent to an intermediate god. However, this kind of domesticated two-headed golden rock was not wild enough, and its combat strength was much weaker. Furthermore, it was very timid, so it was stopped by Nye Tian. When the spectators saw this, they were shocked. They looked at Nye Tian in shock and couldn't help but discuss in low voices. Who is this guy? Does he have a death wish? How dare he offend someone from cloud-shattering divine palace? This kid just asked me about Miss Luoxian. Don't tell me he's interested in Beauty Luo? Him? A mid-stage low god dares to have designs on Miss Luoxian? Even a toad has dreams. Nye Tian listened to the murmurs of the crowd, but his face remained expressionless. Why would he care about what these idiots thought? At this moment, Nye Tian stood on the same spot like a towering mountain. His cold eyes were fixed on the crowd on the two-headed golden rock. Two finely dressed young men stepped out from the two-headed golden rock. Their gazes swept across Nye Tian with a playful look before locking on to Cher. Senior Brother Lin, you really do have good eyesight. Just a moment ago you actually found something good. A slightly chubby man smiled sinisterly and said with a flattering expression. Of course. Lin Xian smiled sinisterly. His greedy eyes unscrupulously sized up Cher's body. From time to time, a lustful glint flashed across his eyes. He thought to himself, I really didn't expect there to be someone more beautiful than junior sister Xian in this world. Senior Brother Lin, this girl isn't inferior to senior sister Luo at all, The slightly plump man laughed mischievously. He was almost drooling. Lin Xian and the other man had just used the two-headed golden rock to show off their power. They had returned because they had noticed someone share. Lin Xian nodded slightly. Then, he took a step forward and completely ignored Nie Tian. He stared at Cher with burning eyes, bowed and said, "I am Lin Xian from Cloud-Shattering Divine Palace. May I know how I should address you, miss?" Nie Tian creased his brows. His face turned extremely gloomy. He didn't expect that he would be ignored. Cher's beautiful eyes flickered. She didn't pay any attention to Lin Xian. She cast a disgusted glance at him and said, "Nie Tian, let's go." "Huh!" Lin Xian was stunned. Then, he shouted, "Silver-haired brat, if you dare to take even half a step forward, I'll kill you on the spot." Lin Xian could already tell that Shui seemed to be completely obedient to Nie Tian, and this caused an indescribable rage to rise in his heart. In his opinion, a girl like Shui could only be with a prodigy like him. Nie Tian was just a small fry. He didn't deserve to win Cher's favor. As soon as Lin Xian finished speaking, he unleashed his aura. A boundless pressure rolled out and pressed down on Nie Tian. In an instant, the crowd felt the enormous pressure. Their eyes couldn't help but tremble. The people from Cloud-Shattering Divine Palace were indeed overbearing. They wanted to kill Nie Tian just because they didn't agree with him. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed. His body trembled slightly and he broke through Lin Xian's pressure. Lin Xian's strength was only at the peak of a low-level celestial, which was 2 levels higher than Nie Tian. How dare he threaten Nie Tian with his aura? What a joke! Nie Tian didn't want to pay attention to such an arrogant idiot. However, Lin Xian was going too far. If he continued to put up with it, he might go crazy. "Oh my! You're not afraid of my aura?" Lin Xian's eyes darkened when his aura was broken. He was slightly surprised. Then, he smiled and said, "Brat, I, Lin Xian, am not a bloodthirsty person. If you know what's good for you, get out of my sight. Or else." "Or else what?" Nie Tianling sneered. The corners of his mouth curled into a strange smile. Not only was this person arrogant, but he was also stupid. He couldn't understand how the Cloud-Shattering Divine Palace could cultivate such an arrogant idiot. "Or else, don't blame me for being merciless," Lin Xian said coldly. The murderous intent in his eyes almost solidified. His aura was released to a distance of 1,000 meters. Terrifying energy surged in the air. "Humph!" Nie Tian suddenly sneered. His eyes were as deep as water and there was no change in his expression. Chapter 1438. Boom! The plump young man suddenly launched an attack in the sky. Countless fist shadows appeared in the sky, blotting out the sky and pressing down on Nie Tian. "Brat, you are just a mid-stage low god while I am a late-stage low god. The difference of one stage is like the difference between heaven and earth. Unless you are a peerless expert, this punch will definitely kill you on the spot," the plump young man said with a cold smile on his face. "Those from the Cloud-Shattering Divine Palace are so strong." The onlookers couldn't help but exclaim in their hearts, "You're courting death." However, Nie Tian stood his ground and had no intention of dodging. The corner of his mouth twitched as he spat out 2 words in a cold manner. Immediately, a long sword appeared in his hand and he swung it. Immediately, a loud and clear sword cry resounded in the void. Boom! Amidst the surging sword intent, a sword shadow was condensed and whizzed out. Rumble! A violent muffled sound was heard, followed by an ear-piercing sound in the air. The huge sword shadow directly swallowed the fist shadow in the air. The sword light was suddenly released, turned into the coldest killing intent, and was released wildly. Not good! The plump young man suddenly sensed that something was wrong. His face changed and he cried out in alarm. But it was too late. He felt his vision turning dark as his body was hit by a tremendous force. His consciousness collapsed in an instant and his body turned into a mass of bloody light. Only a lump of Godhead was left floating in the air, its radiance extremely dim. One sword strike, just one sword strike. Nye Tian killed his opponent instantly and even erased the consciousness in his Godhead. Hiss! Upon seeing this, everyone sucked in a breath of cold air as a chill ran down their spines. Countless gazes locked onto Nye Tian with incredulous expressions. How was this possible? A mid-stage low god instantly killed a late-stage low god with a single sword strike. Moreover, he even erased the latter's consciousness. If they hadn't seen it with their own eyes, they wouldn't have believed it. Generally speaking, only those who were a realm higher than the opponent could erase the consciousness of their opponent. Nye Tian's strength was obviously weaker than his opponent. How could he erase his opponent's consciousness? This was too strange, and no one could understand it. At this moment, everyone was looking at Nye Tian as if they were looking at a monster. There was no longer any mockery in their eyes, only a deep sense of fear. The soul-devouring sword essence is indeed terrifying. Nye Tian's eyes narrowed as he thought to himself. Of course, he knew that in that instant, it was the soul-devouring sword intent that exerted its power and directly engulfed the fat young man's divine sense. Nye Tian was already a sword-mark swordsman. On top of that, he had the power of 500 billion stars in his body and the twin supreme flames. Not to mention a late-stage low god, even a peak-stage low god would have a hard time withstanding his sword. This is impossible. It was only at this moment that Lin Xian finally came to his senses. He exclaimed in shock and astonishment. Humph! Nye Tianling sneered and said in a loud voice, "Are these the martial artists of cloud-splitting divine palace? What a mess!" When the crowd heard Nye Tian's words, they were stunned once again. Their eyes were filled with fear. Nye Tian was too arrogant and overbearing. Not only did he kill the people of cloud-splitting divine palace, but he also humiliated them in public. This was no different from provoking the entire cloud-splitting divine palace. The strangest thing was that Nye Tian didn't look the slightest bit flustered. It was as if he didn't take cloud-splitting divine palace seriously at all. At this moment, the crowd had two thoughts in their minds. The silver-haired young man in front of them was either an idiot or he had a powerful force backing him up. Bastard, you're courting death. When Lin Xian heard Nye Tian humiliating cloud-splitting divine palace in public, he couldn't help but fly into a rage. His aura skyrocketed as he roared, "Brat, today I'll let you know that the people of cloud-splitting divine palace are not people you can afford to offend." As soon as he finished his furious roar, boundless golden light surged out from behind him and instantly condensed into a giant golden statue that was thousands of meters tall. It was as though a deity had descended from the heavens. Its violent aura shook the space within tens of thousands of meters. The golden-bodied colossus swayed slightly, and the entire space trembled along with it. Huh! Nye Tian narrowed his eyes slightly. However, he wasn't afraid at all. His entire body was filled with violent killing intent. Since Lin Xian wanted to fight, Nye Tian would fight with him. Nye Tian also wanted to know how strong he was compared to the younger generation of the gods' realmverse. Since Lin Xian had come on the back of a two-headed golden rock, he should have a high status in cloud-splitting divine palace. Even if he wasn't as strong as Luo Zian, he shouldn't be too far behind. Brat, go to hell! At this moment, Lin Xian was already extremely enraged. As he let out a hysterical roar, the gigantic golden-bodied statue swung its mountain-like fists toward Nye Tian in a ferocious manner. Lin Xian's Mara golden body had been cultivated to the point of perfection. It was enough for him to fight head-on against a mid-god realm expert. He was determined to kill Nye Tian with this punch. Boom! Under the punch, the space shook and the earth trembled. A violent wave of qi descended from the sky, crashing down. Nye Tian frowned. The heavenly star protection appeared around him, and the meteor wings appeared on his back. Then, he took a step forward and soared into the sky. Boom! In the next moment, the Mara golden body's punch landed on the ground. The ground cracked and a huge pit that was hundreds of meters wide appeared. Waves of dust rose from the ground. The strength of the Mara golden body was terrifying. Fortunately, Nyetian dodged in time. Otherwise, he would have been injured by the punch. The crowd retreated tens of thousands of meters away and watched the battle from afar. Kill! In the sky, Nyetian roared. He held his sword with both hands and slashed at the Mara golden body's head. Suddenly, sword will and sword chi surged. A huge sword shadow mixed with blazing blood chi fell with a loud bang. Boom! Crack! As the sword shadow fell, a violent explosion was heard. Then, there was a crisp tearing sound. A terrifying crack appeared on the top of the Mara golden body's head. However, the golden body was still as stable as before. Nyetian felt a strong rebounding force appear. He couldn't help but stagnate and retreat dozens of meters. The Mara golden body's defense was very amazing. It took a blow from Nyetian head-on and only a crack appeared on it. It was really terrifying. The crowd was shocked. Looking at the scene in the sky, they were dumbfounded. They weren't shocked by the Mara golden body, but by the strange strength of Nyetian. It was really strange that a middle-stage low god could fight with an expert at the peak of the low god stage to such an extent. Brat, you broke my Mara golden body. How is this possible? Lin Xian couldn't help but cry out in surprise when he felt that the Mara golden body had been broken. He knew that the most terrifying thing about the Mara golden body was its amazing defense. Although he only had the strength of a middle-stage low god, his Mara golden body could withstand the attack of an early-stage or even a middle-stage low god. Nyetian obviously only had the strength of a middle-stage low god. How could he break the Mara golden body? So what if I did? Nyetian laughed coldly. To be honest, he was very dissatisfied with the power of his sword strike just now. Chapter 1439. Boom, crack. In the sky, Nyetian slashed down with his sword again. Another horrifying crack appeared on the Mara golden body. Bastard, you're courting death. Lin Xian was completely enraged. He roared furiously and looked like he had lost his mind. The Mara golden body danced wildly in the air like a drunkard. Unfortunately, Nyetian was very agile. With the meteor wings on his back, he was extremely fast and was able to dodge the Mara golden body's attacks every time. The Mara golden body was indeed terrifying. Its defensive and offensive capabilities were extremely shocking. However, it also had a fatal weakness, and that was its speed. The Mara golden body's speed was too slow. If it encountered someone like Nyetian who had the meteor wings, it would only be a toy. No matter how strong one was, it would be useless if one couldn't hit their opponent. Boom, 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 crack, crack, crack. Following that, a series of muffled noises and cracking sounds came from the sky. Every time Nyetian slashed down with his sword, a crack would be left on the Mara golden body. Bastard, fight me head-on if you're a man. Lin Xian had already gone crazy. He roared loudly, but he could feel the power in his body getting weaker and weaker. The Mara golden body was also slowly shrinking. The crowd below was dumbfounded. Nyetian was simply toying with Lin Xian. The people on the twin-headed golden rock didn't dare to lend a hand when they saw what was happening. They could only watch helplessly. Humph, it's time. With a cold smile, the corner of Nyetian's mouth twitched slightly. The sword intent around him suddenly expanded, and a wisp of seemingly weak but extremely violent flame appeared in his palm. It was the primal chaos flame. The Mara golden body's defense is very strong. It's a good opportunity to test the power of the chaotic flame. Nyetian murmured. Then, he flipped his palm and the chaotic flame surged onto the blade of the sky slash. It instantly merged perfectly with the sword will. Blood devours the sky. In the next moment, violent blood chi surged around Nyetian. The sword will on the long sword was greatly stimulated. The sword radiance shot out tens of thousands of meters away, and a huge blood-colored sword burning with flames appeared in the sky. Hiss! The moment the giant blood-red sword appeared, the crowd could not help but suck in a breath of cold air. They all felt a strong murderous sword intent surging over, causing them to tremble. "What are you trying to do?" Lin Xian suddenly sensed that something was amiss. His expression suddenly changed and his voice became sharp. "End this battle." Nie Tianling sneered and no longer hesitated. He thrust his heaven/sword. A terrifying sword shadow swept across the sky. It was as if a pillar of the heavens had collapsed. It pressed down on the golden body of Mo Luo. No! At that moment, Lin Xian felt an irresistible force crashing down on him. He immediately understood that this sword was not something that his Mara golden body could withstand. He screamed in panic, but it was too late. Boom! The sword shadow fell and heavily smashed on the golden body of Maluo. A loud bang sounded and the golden body of Maluo suddenly trembled. Then, countless cracks appeared on its surface. The huge golden body of Maluo actually collapsed in an instant. The Mara golden body that Lin Xian was so proud of was ultimately unable to withstand Nie Tian's attack. Bang! A muffled sound could be heard as Lin Xian's body was sent flying like a kite with a broken string. He landed heavily on the ground, causing a cloud of dust to rise. When the crowd saw this, their eyes went blank. They were so shocked that they couldn't say a word. Nie Tian stood tall in the sky. His face was slightly pale. He raised his head and looked at the two-headed golden rock not far away. That black-furred beast seemed to have sensed danger. It flapped its wings and retreated. Lin Xian had lost. This was something that no one had expected. As Nie Tian landed, Cher immediately walked up to him. She had a complicated look on her face, as if she wanted to say something. "I know." Nie Tian smiled. Of course he knew that Shui didn't want him to kill anyone. Cher had once told him that the murderous intent in his blood was too strong and that there was an evil force hidden within it. Every time he killed a person, the killing intent in his blood would increase by a bit, and the evil power would become even more violent. Nie Tian still remembered what happened when he was condensing his demonic aura. Although he could not sense the evil force in his body, he believed in Cher. He would not kill anyone if he could avoid it. Nie Tian looked at Lin Xian, who was lying on the ground, and walked towards him step by step, a ruthless look in his eyes. Lin Xian was in a sorry state. His body was covered in blood and his face was almost unrecognizable. What do you want?" Lin Xian's voice trembled in fear when he saw Nie Tian walking towards him. Only now did he realize why Shui had chosen to stay by Nie Tian's side instead of him. Compared to Nie Tian, he was the real trash. "Your name is Lin Xian?" Nie Tian's lips curled into a cold smile and he said, "Do you know Luo Xian from Cloud's Splitting Divine Palace?" Junior Sister Xian? Lin Xian was taken aback by Nie Tian's sudden mention of Luo Xian. He hastily said, "I'm Junior Martial Sister Xian's senior martial brother. If you want to meet her, I can introduce you to her." Luo Xian was currently very famous in the God Awakening realm. She was known as the most beautiful woman in the realm. All the young geniuses in the God Awakening realm admired and worshipped her. Lin Xian assumed that Nie Tian wanted to know Luo Xian because he wanted to know her. Know her? Nie Tian laughed and thought to himself, "I'm afraid no one knows her better than me in this world. I've known her face for more than 100 years. Since you are Luo Xian's senior brother, you have a reason to live." Nie Tian smiled and asked, "How is your strength compared to Luo Xian's?" Lin Xian's eyes trembled slightly and he said awkwardly, "Although I am Junior Sister Xian's senior brother, I am much weaker than her. If it wasn't for the grand competition of the 12 Shrine, Junior Sister Xian would have become a mid-god long ago." Even though her strength is only at the peak of the lower god stage, her true strength far exceeds that of an ordinary mid-god. I once saw her defeat a mid-god stage senior brother with a single sword strike. Lin Xian's eyes were filled with fascination as he spoke. Once upon a time, he was very close to Luo Xian. However, after she awakened the Thousand Clouds' dark body, they became people from two different worlds. I see. Nie Tian smiled faintly. He was not surprised by Luo Xian's strength. He thought to himself, Luo Xian, back in the god realm of the heaven world, your sword principle was already weaker than mine. Now that you are in the realmverse, you are still weaker than me. My lord, do you want to get to know junior sister Xian? Lin Xian asked cautiously when he saw Nie Tian's gloomy face. Nie Tianling laughed. His face instantly darkened as he said, I won't kill you. I'll let you go. When you see Luo Xian, help me pass a message to her. A message? What message? Lin Xian was stunned. He didn't know what Nie Tian wanted to say to Luo Xian. He guessed that it was probably something along the lines of his admiration for her. Chapter 1440. Nie Tian's eyes trembled slightly, but he regained his composure in an instant. This. Lin Xian was taken aback. He looked at Nie Tian with a puzzled look on his face. He had thought that Nie Tian wanted to get to know Luo Xian through him, but from what Nie Tian had said, it seemed that he had known Luo Xian for a long time and that there was a deep hatred between them. Otherwise, Nie Tian wouldn't have been so agitated. Do you remember what I said? Nie Tian asked coldly, his eyes as grim as still water. Yes, I do. Lin Xian's teeth were chattering as he nodded. That's good. Get lost. Nie Tianling smiled coldly and turned to leave. Lin Xian struggled to his feet as he stared at Nie Tian's back with a horrified and confused expression on his face. He couldn't figure out why Nie Tian was so strong, and he couldn't figure out what kind of hatred Nie Tian and Luo Xian had for each other. However, he felt very lucky to be able to keep his life. Nie Tian, right? Lin Xian's eyes flashed coldly when he saw Nie Tian walking away. He thought to himself, I'll definitely help you pass the message to junior sister Xian. I don't care what kind of hatred you have for junior sister Xian. There's only one ending for you, and that's death. Lin Xian's face turned ferocious when he heard the word death. He knew that Luo Xian was the direct disciple of the palace master of the cloud-splitting divine palace. There were even rumors that if Luo Xian could win first place, she would be the next palace master of the cloud-splitting divine palace. In Lin Xian's opinion, although Nie Tian's strength was strange, he definitely wouldn't stand a chance against Luo Xian. Luo Xian had the Thousand Cloud dark body, one of the four ancient forbidden bodies. That kind of power that could crush everything was not something that Nie Tian could fight against. Lin Xian's lips twitched when he thought of this. He shook his body and the blood on his body dispersed. He recovered some of his strength and returned to the two-headed golden rock. The huge double-headed golden rock flapped its wings and disappeared into the sky. The crowd stared at the huge figure in the sky, unable to utter a word for a long time. No one had expected the battle between Nie Tian and Lin Xian to end in such a manner. As for Nie Tian, he had long since left this place. Nie Tian did not waste any time, and directly headed towards Nine Heaven City. He was prepared to pay a visit to the Door of Desolation to see if it was the same sect as the Desolate Sky sect of the past. Half a day later, Nie Tian and the others arrived at Nine Heaven City. The Nine Heaven City was not big. It could not be compared to cities like the Medicine King Ancient Capital or the Demonic Dragon City, but it was about the same as a city in the plain world. Nine Heaven City looks like it's just a third-rate city. Nie Tian looked at the city in front of him, smiled, and said to Cher and Ed, "Let's enter the city." After a while, Nie Tian and the other two arrived at the main street of Nine Heaven City. There weren't many people, but it could still be considered lively. Nie Tian found a random person and inquired about the situation of the Door of Desolation. Then, Nie Tian brought Cher and Ed to a relatively remote place in Nine Heavens City. In front of them was a dilapidated mansion, surrounded by thorns and thorns, as if it had been abandoned. Nie Tian frowned, walked over, and saw a huge rock at the entrance, covered by lush weeds. He could vaguely make out 2 words. Desolate. Looks like this is the Door of Desolation. It's already so dilapidated. Nie Tian shook his head and smiled bitterly. I wonder if there's anyone else here. He had already mentally prepared himself, but seeing the Door of Desolation in front of him with his own eyes still caught him off guard. Desolate stone. At that moment, Disher Tian's voice suddenly rang in Nie Tian's mind, sounding very surprised. Desolate stone? Nie Tian was stunned. He looked at the huge rock in front of him and used his divine sense to probe it. He couldn't help but frown. He sensed a terrifying aura from the boulder. This aura was very similar to the power of desolation of Wang Haolin, who possessed the body of desolation. However, it was far stronger than Wang Haolin's power of desolation. Looks like the Door of Desolation is the Desolate Sky sect of the past. Nie Tian nodded and couldn't help but smile bitterly. According to Disher Tian, the Desolate Sky sect was one of the top forces in the territory hundreds of thousands of years ago. It was really regrettable that it had not fallen to such a state. As he spoke, Nie Tian took a step forward and raised his palm slightly. A flame surged out, burning all the weeds around the desolate stone. Only then did Nie Tian realize that the desolate stone was much bigger than he had imagined. He had originally thought that it was only a rock 4 to 5 meters tall. However, after the weeds were burned, he realized that the desolate stone was actually deeply embedded in the ground. Only a small part of it was exposed above the ground. Nie Tian glanced at the desolate stone. Other than the strong desolate power it contained, he didn't find anything unusual. Nie Tian entered the mansion to take a look. He didn't find anyone. It seemed like the Door of Desolation no longer existed. There was not a single person. I didn't expect the Door of Desolation to be gone. Nie Tian laughed bitterly. He walked out and looked at the desolate stone in front of him. He couldn't help but ask, Disher Tian, this desolate stone is so strange. Why does it contain such strong desolate power? Nie Tian did not feel that there was anything special about the desolate stone. How could a stone store such a powerful amount of desolate power? Nie Tian, get out of the way. Just as Nie Tian finished speaking, Disher Tian's voice suddenly rang out. He sounded very nervous. Huh! Nie Tian frowned. His reaction was extremely fast. The meteor wings appeared on his back. With a flap of the wings, he swept Cher and Ed up and retreated. Boom! At this moment, the desolate stone suddenly released an incomparably powerful power of desolation. It immediately turned into surging waves of air that spread in all directions. The next moment, a strange scene occurred. Wherever the desolate power passed, the surrounding weeds and thorns were instantly swallowed up and turned black. It was as if their life force had been taken away. Seeing this, Nie Tian's face couldn't help but darken. He took a step forward and leaped thousands of meters into the sky. Boom! The desolate power swept across like a wild wind. Everything with life within tens of thousands of meters was swallowed up and turned into ashes. Trees, flowers, and thorns turned into ashes in an instant. This! Nie Tian looked at everything on the ground. He felt a terrifying aura of death spreading, as if it could take away all life. The desolate power was indeed terrifying. Brother Nie Tian, what's going on? Ed was stunned. He didn't understand what was going on and asked in surprise. Nie Tian shook his head. He didn't know what was going on either. Boom! At that moment, the desolate stone suddenly shook violently. The ground rumbled and a violent power surged crazily, as if it wanted to break out of the desolate stone. What a strong soul aura! In an instant, Nye Tion's divine sense enveloped the desolate stone. He actually felt a very vast soul aura from the desolate stone. There was a soul imprisoned in the desolate stone. Chapter 1441. The Desolate Ancestor. Hearing Sakura suddenly shout this name, Nye Tion's face suddenly changed. He never thought that the soul imprisoned in the desolate stone was the Desolate Ancestor. Sakura had mentioned the Desolate Ancestor before. This person was the founder of the Desolate Heaven sect, the #1 sect master of the Desolate Heaven sect, a peak expert of the ancient times, and an expert of the same era as Sakura. Nye Tion clearly remembered what Sakura had said. If he wanted to save Wang Haolin, the Desolate Ancestor would have to be reborn. At this moment, the legendary Desolate Ancestor actually appeared in front of him. How could he not be excited? Boom! At this time, the desolate stone shook violently again, and then a huge roar sounded. The ground was torn apart, and the desolate stone rose from the ground. Nye Tion, get back! Sakura Heaven cried out in alarm as he sensed that something was wrong. Nye Tion's reaction was extremely fast. His figure moved, and he retreated a few thousand meters. Boom! In the next moment, the desolate stone broke out of the ground, and the entire stone suddenly rushed into the sky like a wild beast. Ha 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 ha! 300,000 years, I, broken desolate stone, have finally awakened again. At the same time, a deep and powerful voice resounded in the void, turning into billowing waves of air that impacted the space, causing the heaven and earth to tremble. What a terrifying power! Nye Tion felt the waves of air rushing over, and it made him feel a suffocating pressure. He couldn't help but retreat again. The Desolate Ancestor was too terrifying. Just a wisp of his soul could explode with such terrifying power. Nye Tion guessed that this person was definitely an expert at the peak of the God state when he was alive. Brother Nye Tion, that stone spoke. Ed hid behind Nye Tion, completely unaware of what was going on. His teeth were chattering as he said in horror. Cher, Ed, you two retreat first. Nye Tion frowned and signaled Cher and Ed to retreat. The two nodded and retreated tens of thousands of meters away. Boom! At this moment, the desolate stone soared into the sky and stood in mid-air like a floating hill. It was surrounded by the strange power of desolation. From afar, it looked like a black cloud. Immediately, a strange sound came from the desolate stone. Nye Tion suddenly felt a pair of invisible cold eyes staring at him. Kid, was it you who awakened my soul? The Desolate Ancestor's voice came from the desolate stone, sounding very surprised. Nye Tion was also taken aback, a puzzled look on his face. He hadn't done anything just now. Could it be that he had accidentally awakened the Desolate Ancestor's soul that was sleeping in the desolate stone? Without waiting for Nye Tion to answer, the Desolate Ancestor's voice rang out again. This time, he was even more surprised. Kid, you're very unusual. You've fused with both the universal boundary and the heart of nothingness. No wonder you were able to awaken my soul. Nye Tion was stunned. He then remembered that he had accidentally used the chaotic flame to burn the weeds around the desolate stone. The chaotic flame must have been accidentally absorbed by the desolate stone and awakened the Desolate Ancestor's soul. The chaotic flame contained the power of creation from the universal boundary. It was not surprising that it could awaken the Desolate Ancestor's soul. No. The Desolate Ancestor exclaimed again, as if he had discovered something even more terrifying. You're the legendary celestial demon, original embryo, the first of the 9 ancient taboos. The Desolate Ancestor's voice was filled with great fear. He had never imagined that the first person he met after his soul awakened would have such a powerful body. Not only did he fuse with the dual fire sovereign, but he also had the legendary celestial demon, original embryo. Of course, the desolate ancestor also discovered the dragon vein and the various sword essences in Nietion's body. However, compared to the dual fire sovereign and the celestial demon original embryo, these were completely negligible. Ha 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 ha! Suddenly, the desolate ancestor laughed wildly and said, "Heaven is kind to me, Duan Desolate, to let me meet such a terrifying warrior." Nietion frowned and suddenly thought of something. His eyes darkened and his face became slightly nervous. He could sense that the desolate ancestor wanted to take over his body. Sakura had also wanted to take over Nietion's body in the past. Unfortunately, Nietion had backfired and imprisoned him in the celestial demon original embryo. It was not surprising that the desolate ancestor wanted to take over Nietion's body. "Kid, I really should thank you for awakening my soul, but your body is too tempting. I must have it," the desolate ancestor said in a deep voice without any hesitation. The desolate ancestor said in a deep voice. The power of desolation on the desolation stone suddenly became violent and filled the void within thousands of meters. Nietion's eyes narrowed and he said coldly, "Desolate ancestor, I awakened your soul, but you want to take over my body. Is this how you thank me? Kid, you can't blame me for this. You can only blame yourself for being too freakish." The desolate ancestor smiled sinisterly and the desolate stone floated over. Immediately, endless power of desolation spread out and enveloped Nietion. Nietion instantly felt an extremely terrifying power rushing into his body, as if it was going to tear his soul apart. Compared to Sakura, the desolate ancestor was more direct and terrifying. Nietion was surrounded by the power of desolation, unable to use any of his yuan power. He couldn't even use the flame of chaos or the power of the stars. The desolate ancestor was too terrifying. Even though he was just a wisp of his soul, he was not someone Nietion could fight. Most importantly, the desolate stone contained an abnormally powerful power of desolation. It gave the desolate ancestor the power of an overgod or even a paramount god. Nietion. Cher couldn't help but cry out when she saw Nietion under the desolate ancestor's control. "Don't come over!" Nietion shouted, motioning for Cher not to act rashly. With Cher's current strength, the desolate ancestor could take her life in an instant. "Desolate ancestor, don't regret your decision to devour my soul." Nietion forcefully endured the intense pain in his body. Surprisingly, he didn't show the slightest bit of fear. Instead, he spoke in a threatening tone. "Kid, your body and soul are strong, but you're too weak. You haven't awakened your fiend god nascent embryo yet. You can't resist me now," the desolate ancestor said coldly. He didn't take Nietion's threat to heart. However, in the next moment, as soon as he sent a wisp of his soul into Nietion's divine sense, he went blank and exclaimed, "You're Sakura Tion." The moment the desolate ancestor entered Nietion's consciousness, he realized that there was already a soul there. It was very powerful, no weaker than his own. "Duan Huangwu, it's been hundreds of thousands of years. I didn't think you'd still remember an old friend," Sakura coldly said, his tone full of mockery. He and Duan Huangwu were experts of the same generation, and they'd even fought before. Chapter 1442. "Indra!" The barren ancestor cried out in surprise. "How did you get into this kid's consciousness?" Sakura was surprised, and then said, "Duan Huangwu, the terror of the fiend god nascent embryo is definitely not something you can imagine. If you want to occupy his body, the final result is very likely to be the same as me, imprisoned in the fiend god nascent embryo." The barren ancestor was stunned for a moment, but then he understood and laughed wildly. Indra, the heaven-slaughtering demon sword that destroyed countless sects in the past, was imprisoned by a little baby. Ha ha! The barren ancestor almost went crazy as if he had seen the funniest thing in the world. Indra used to be a person who shocked the 9 major realms hundreds of thousands of years ago. With his own strength, he destroyed countless sects and was known as the heaven-slaughtering demon sword. Who would have thought that such a domineering character would one day be imprisoned by a martial artist with the strength of a lower god? This was too funny. No wonder the barren ancestor couldn't control himself and laughed wildly. Indra was slightly embarrassed but calmed down in an instant. He said solemnly, "Duan Huangwu, do you think you are stronger than me?" When I wanted to take over his body, the god-fiend nascent embryo showed no signs of doing so. Now it is in an active state. Is your soul really so strong that it can resist the backlash of the god-fiend nascent embryo? At this time, Indra didn't care about his face anymore. He told everything that happened in order to warn the barren ancestor not to take the risk. The barren ancestor froze for a moment and then calmed down. He thought to himself, Indra can't be lying. His soul is indeed imprisoned by this kid. My strength is about the same as Indra's, and I don't know much about the god-fiend nascent embryo. If I forcibly invade his consciousness and trigger the backlash of the god-fiend nascent embryo, I might really end up like Indra. At this moment, the barren ancestor hesitated. He knew very well how strong Indra was. Since Sakra was unable to resist the backlash of the fiend god nascent embryo, it would be very difficult for him, Duan Huangwu, to resist as well. Desolate ancestor, I'm warning you. If you want to devour my soul, don't regret it, Nie Tian's voice rang out. 3 souls appeared in his divine sense. The barren forefather calmed down and stood in place, his brows furrowed as he considered the matter. Forcibly occupying Nie Tian's body was a huge gamble for him. If he lost the gamble, then he would end up the same as Di Shi Tian, being imprisoned in the fiend god origin embryo. However, if he won the bet, he would obtain a monstrous body. With the fiend god nascent embryo body fused with the supreme dual fires and a soul at the peak of the immortal realm, the desolate forefather believed that he could use this to break through to the sage realm. The sage realm, these 4 words were too tempting for Duan Huangwu. Baron Duan, this is a gamble. Do you dare to take it? Sakra observed from the side and spoke in a heavy voice. Of course. The barren forefather suddenly hardened his heart and spat out the word coldly. He laughed in a low voice and said, When I failed to break through to the sage realm, my body was destroyed. I had no choice but to imprison my soul in the desolate stone. Now that my soul has awakened, if I can't find a suitable body, I will die. This kid's martial body is too strong. This is a chance given to me by the heavens to break through to the sage realm. How can I miss it? The barren ancestor's eyes burned with excitement as he spoke, as if he couldn't wait any longer. Nie Tian's eyes darkened when he heard the barren forefather's words. He didn't expect this guy to be so crazy. He knew the chances were slim, but he still wanted to take the risk. Baron Duan, have you really thought it through? At this time, Sakra sneered and said, If you dare to forcibly invade his divine sense, I will not let you succeed even if I have to die with you. Sakra, you. The barren forefather was stunned. He didn't expect Sakra to take the initiative to protect Nie Tian. Looking at Sakra's expression, it was definitely not a threat. Nie Tian was also stunned. He was puzzled. Did Sakra find his conscience? Sakra smiled and said, Nie Tian boy, if this body must have a master, and this master can't be me, then between you and Baron Duan, I can only choose you. Sakra and Nie Tian had been together for a long time, so he understood Nie Tian's actions very well. At least compared to Baron Duan, Nie Tian was a person with principles and a bottom line. This was very important to Sakra. If Baron Duan took over Nie Tian's body, he would not hesitate to erase Sakra's soul. Sakra, are you crazy? The barren forefather roared. He didn't expect Sakra to make such a decision. Sakra sneered and said, Baron Duan, I know better than anyone what kind of person you are. If you take over this body, Do you think I still have a way to live? At least, Nye Tian had promised Sakura that if he was strong enough one day, he would help Sakura restore his body. Nye Tian was a man of his word, and the Baron Forefather was a man who would stop at nothing. Sakura, of course, chose Nye Tian. The Baron Forefather's eyes were gloomy, and he hesitated again. If he invaded Nye Tian's divine sense alone, he might have a chance. But if Sakura joined in, he wouldn't have the slightest chance. Bastard! The Baron Forefather roared. His soul flashed and left Nye Tian's divine sense. Nye Tian let out a long breath, and his face relaxed a lot. Stinking brat, get lost. I'm not interested in you anymore. The Baron Forefather left Nye Tian's divine sense and roared angrily. He didn't plan on killing Nye Tian. He couldn't bear to destroy such a powerful martial body. Baron Forefather, I'm the one who awakened your soul. Shouldn't you say thank you? Nye Tian faintly smiled and said, Stinking brat, I'm already being merciful by not taking over your body. Don't push your luck. The Baron Forefather shouted coldly. The power of desolation around the desolation stone suddenly disappeared, and the desolation stone quickly shrank until it was only a meter wide. The desolation stone was the desolate sky sex sacred object. It could change its size at will. Baron Forefather, you're going to take over someone else's body, right? Nye Tian frowned and asked. The Baron Forefather's soul had been awakened. If he couldn't get a new body, his soul would slowly dissipate and eventually disappear. However, even if he took over another warrior's soul, it was still risky because not all martial bodies were suitable for him. The best choice for the Baron Forefather now was to find a divine material to rebuild his body. Unfortunately, he didn't have that much time to find a replacement body. This is my own business. You don't need to worry about it. The Baron Forefather shouted coldly. The desolation stone shook as if it wanted to leave immediately. Baron Forefather, I know someone who has a desolate body. Nye Tian's eyes flashed and he suddenly said. Chapter 1443. Up in the sky, the Baron Ancestor froze when he heard Nye Tian mention the physique of desolation. Brat, are you telling the truth? The Baron Ancestor exclaimed, worried that Nye Tian was lying to him. Of course it's true, Nye Tian said, smiling faintly. Where is he? The Baron Ancestor shouted excitedly. It would be a great choice for him to possess someone with the physique of desolation. His original body was the physique of desolation, so his soul and the physique of desolation were very compatible. Nye Tian, you aren't counting on Duan Huangwu to help you save someone, are you? Shi Tian's voice rang in his mind, filled with confusion. He knew that if the Baron Ancestor saw Wang Haolin, he wouldn't hesitate to possess her body, even if she was a woman. Nye Tian laughed but didn't answer Shi Tian's question. Instead, he took a step forward and asked, Baron Ancestor, if I bring you to see this person, what benefits will you give me? Benefits? The Baron Ancestor paused for a moment and then understood. He chuckled. Little fella, as long as you bring me to see this person, I can promise to do 3 things for you. I can promise to do 3 things for you. How about it? Not much. Nye Tian laughed. I'm not interested in these empty promises. Only the most direct benefits will move me. Little fella, what do you want? The Baron Ancestor was startled, then he laughed strangely and thought to himself, it seems that everyone in this world is the same. For their own benefit, they will do anything. I want to know. Nye Tian smiled faintly and his eyes narrowed as he pondered. At the same time, he spoke to Shi Tian. Shi Tian, there is a sword array in my consciousness. I need your help with the power of your soul. With that, Nye Tian's mind moved and a sword array appeared in his consciousness. It was the soul-devouring sword array that the Sword Elder left for him. Sakura was stunned for a moment. He felt a power that could devour souls from the sword formation. He couldn't help but frown. Then, he thought of something and exclaimed, You want to use this sword formation to imprison desolate Duan again? Nie Tian was insane. He wanted to imprison the desolate ancestor's soul again. Why not? Nie Tian countered with a question. The desolate ancestor is too terrifying. If we let him go and he finds a suitable body, the realm will have another great monster. The barren ancestor had been awakened by Nie Tian, so he had to imprison him again. Since the barren ancestor had saved Wang Haolin's life, Nie Tian couldn't let him go. Nie Tian, this is crazy. Your soul-devouring sword formation is indeed very powerful, but your soul force is too weak. You simply can't bring out the power of the soul-devouring sword formation. Sakura shook his head repeatedly. It turned out that Nie Tian was even crazier than him. That's why I need your help. Nie Tian smiled faintly. His eyes were very firm. The soul-devouring sword formation needed a strong soul force to activate in order to bring out its power. Unfortunately, Nie Tian's soul force wasn't strong enough, so he needed Sakura's help. Sakura was stunned. He was worried that if he entered the soul-devouring sword formation and was directly imprisoned by Nie Tian, then he would really want to cry but have no tears. Sakura, we have known each other for a long time. Am I the kind of person who goes back on his words? Of course, Nie Tian knew what Sakura was worried about. He said with a magnanimous face, I promise you, as long as you help me this time. The day my fiend god original embryo awakens will be the day I will set you free. Okay. I will help you. Sakura thought for a long time and finally chose to believe Nie Tian. His soul shadow moved and directly entered the soul-devouring sword formation. Boom! Sakura's soul transformed into a huge force and fused with the soul-devouring sword formation. Instantly, the entire sword formation erupted with a huge force and the soul-devouring aura became stronger. Brat, have you made up your mind? The desolate ancestor asked impatiently. I have. The corner of Nie Tian's lips curled up. Desolate ancestor, I'm sure you can tell that I have a sword intent of the mental attribute. I don't have a deep understanding of this sword intent, so I'd like to ask you to give me some pointers. Is that all right? I'm not a swordsman. Shi Tian is known as the heaven-slaughtering demon sword. Just let him guide you. Desolate ancestor was stunned for a moment. So you're not willing? Nie Tian didn't explain too much. His eyes darkened as he smiled and said, Then forget it. With that, Nie Tian did not stay any longer. He turned around and prepared to leave. Wait. The desolate ancestor's heart trembled. In the end, he couldn't resist the temptation of the desolate body and said, I'll guide you. All right. Then come into my consciousness. Nie Tian nodded with a smile, but he didn't turn around. The desolate ancestor hesitated. He just entered Nie Tian's consciousness and didn't feel anything. Plus, he didn't think Nie Tian could pose any threat to him. Without hesitation, the desolate ancestor's soul rushed out of the desolate stone and entered Nie Tian's consciousness. Boom! However, the moment the desolate ancestor entered Nie Tian's consciousness, the soul-devouring sword array suddenly expanded and filled the entire consciousness space, enveloping the desolate ancestor. Brat, what is this? The desolate ancestor screamed as he sensed something was wrong. This is my sword formation. Give me some pointers. Nie Tian smiled darkly. The soul-devouring sword array exploded with power. The soul-devouring sword intent pressed down on the desolate ancestor like a tsunami. The desolate ancestor had left the desolate stone. Without the support of the desolate power, he couldn't resist the violent sword intent. Brat, how dare you trick me? In an instant, the desolate ancestor felt the violent sword intent pressing down on him. The power of his soul was rapidly being absorbed by the sword intent. Only then did he realize that Nie Tian had set a trap for him. Have fun. Nie Tianling smiled coldly. The soul-devouring sword array began to spin even more violently. Ah! The desolate ancestor screamed hysterically in his consciousness. Although his soul was strong, it couldn't withstand the soul-devouring sword array's devouring power. After a while, the desolate ancestor's soul was only left with a weak aura. It seemed like it would disappear in an instant. As long as the desolate ancestor's soul was devoured, there would be no more desolate ancestor in this world. The desolate ancestor was a super expert from hundreds of thousands of years ago. Never in his wildest dreams would he have imagined that he would fall at the hands of Nyetian. Damn brat, I won't let you go even if I become a ghost! The desolate ancestor screamed crazily, his voice filled with despair. Humph! Nyetian sneered. Desolate ancestor, you're helping me save someone. I don't want to see you become a ghost. With that, Nyetian willed the soul-devouring sword array to disappear. The desolate ancestor was stunned. He immediately flew out of Nyetian's consciousness, wanting to return to the desolate stone. Unfortunately, he was overthinking. Chapter 1444. Very good. Nyetian's lips curled up into a faint smile as he sensed the soul within the godhood. He had quite a few godhoods on him, but his divine sense had already been erased. They were perfect vessels to imprison souls. The barren ancestor's soul was imprisoned within the godhood. It could exist for at least a few years, and it wouldn't be able to escape. Success! Indra's voice rang out in Yi Futian's divine sense. He hadn't expected things to go so smoothly. Nyetian had really imprisoned the barren ancestor's soul once more. Many thanks, Indra. Nyetian smiled. He was very satisfied with the result. Nyetian, remember your promise. Indra's soul was a bit weak at the moment, so he returned to his nascent embryo space. Nyetian nodded and stepped forward, holding the desolation stone in his hand. He could sense the power of desolation within it, and his eyes couldn't help but widen. The power of desolation within the desolation stone was too strong. If it was released at full force, it could probably destroy an entire world. Luckily, we imprisoned the barren ancestor again. If he had escaped, the consequences would have been unimaginable, Nyetian murmured, looking at the ashes beneath his feet. Although the barren ancestor didn't have a fleshly body, the desolation stone alone was enough to fight a overgod or even a paramount god. Brat, let me out, Nyetian said. He sensed the godhood and heard the barren ancestor's furious howl. I'll give you some time to calm down, barren ancestor. Nyetian smiled and put away the godhood. Nyetian, are you all right? At that moment, Schwerer and Ed walked over and stared at Nyetian with disbelief written all over their faces. Neither of them knew what had just happened. I'm fine. Nyetian smiled and handed the desolation stone to Ed, who carried it on his back. The desolate stone was very heavy, weighing hundreds of thousands of kilograms. However, to Ed, who had the divine dragon's bloodline and the demon dragon's heart, it was a piece of cake. Nyetian glanced at his feet. There was nothing left for him to linger here. He didn't stay any longer and left immediately. The grand competition of the 12 Shrine was about to begin. Nyetian and the other two did not waste any time. After leaving Nine Heavens City, they headed straight for the Red Moon Divine Palace. A day later, the three of them appeared in the Scarlet Moon mountain range. They could already faintly see the Scarlet Moon Divine Palace. I've been gone for so long. I wonder how Rushi is doing? Nyetian's lips curled up as he murmured to himself. Nyetian, can you come with me to see Sister Rushi later? Cher was a little nervous. She raised her face and asked worriedly. Of course. Nyetian knew what Cher was worried about. He would tell Imo Rushi about him and Cher. In fact, he already knew that Imo Rushi had accepted Cher a long time ago. At this time, there were obviously more people in the Scarlet Moon mountain range than usual. The grand competition of the 12 Shrine would be held in the Scarlet Moon Divine Palace. The young geniuses of the 12 Shrine would all come to the Scarlet Moon mountain range. The 12 Shrine was the peak force of the God-shocking domain. The grand competition of the 12 Shrine was a competition between the geniuses of the entire god-shocking domain. The figures of Nietian and the other two descended and walked in the mountain forest. When the surrounding people saw the three of them, they couldn't help but look at them strangely. The three of them each had their own characteristic. One was silver-haired, one was otherworldly beautiful, and one was extremely skinny but carried a strange stone. Nietian didn't care and went straight to the Scarlet Moon Divine Palace. Thinking that he would be able to see Mo Rushi soon, he was very excited. After a while, Nietian and the others arrived at the foot of the mountain where the Scarlet Moon Divine Palace was located. At this time, there were many huge tents at the foot of the mountain, clearly divided into different areas. These were the residences of the various shrines. There were still a few days before the grand competition of the 12 Shrine would begin. The fact that the 12 Shrine had arrived in advance showed how much importance they attached to the competition. Nietian. At this time, a familiar voice sounded. Zhao Zi appeared. When he saw Nietian return, he was very happy and said, "Lord Palace has been sending people to inquire about you for the past few days. I didn't expect you to return so soon. Lord Zhao, since I have joined the Scarlet Moon Divine Palace, of course I won't miss the grand competition of the 12 Shrine," Nietian said with a faint smile. Zhao Zi's complexion looked good. The injuries caused by the dragon might had completely healed. "Nietian, your strength." At this time, Zhao Zi suddenly realized something. He was stunned for a moment and was at a loss for words. It had been less than 3 months since Nietian left the Scarlet Moon Divine Palace. When he returned, his strength had already reached the mid-stage low god realm. There were even signs of him breaking through to the late-stage low god realm. This kind of advancement speed was too terrifying. When Zhao Zi thought of Nietian's identity and his fiend god origin embryo, he thought to himself, "The fiend god origin embryo is indeed the strongest of the 9 great ancient taboos. It's too scary." But the next moment, Zhao Zi suddenly thought of something and couldn't help but frown. He couldn't help but worry. "Don't worry. Even if I participate in the low god realm competition, I can still win the championship," Nietian said with a faint smile. He knew what Zhao Zi was worried about. "I hope so," Zhao Zi nodded awkwardly. If Nietian won the championship in the Heavenly Emperor Realm competition, Zhao Zi was 100% sure. But if he won the championship in the Low God Realm competition, it wouldn't be so easy. He had heard that the Cloud-Splitting Divine Palace, Heaven Sword Divine Palace, Medicine King Divine Palace, and other sects all had geniuses that were hard to come by in 1,000 years. This was especially true for Luo Xian of the Shattering Cloud Divine Palace and Jian Qiu of the Heaven Sword Divine Palace. Both of them were popular candidates for the first position of the Lesser God Chief. Moreover, they could suppress the increase in their strength and maintain their strength at the peak of the Lesser God stage, all for the sake of the first position of the Lesser God Chief. Nietian, on the other hand, was someone who had just advanced to the divine state not long ago. Compared to those few people, his foundation was far inferior. "Your Excellency, you sure talk big. A mere mid-stage low god dares to dream of becoming the chief of low god rank? What a joke." It was at this moment that a deep and disdainful voice suddenly sounded from high up in the sky. Nietian's eyes narrowed and he turned to look at the sky. A luxuriously dressed young man was standing in the sky, staring at him coldly. He looked extremely unfriendly and even contained strong killing intent. Nietian stared blankly for a moment. Then, he saw that the person behind the luxuriously dressed young man was none other than Lin Xian. He immediately realized that the luxuriously dressed young man must be from the Cloud-Splitting Divine Palace. "Senior Brother Zhu, this is the man who killed the disciples of the Cloud-Splitting Divine Palace. He even asked me about junior sister Xian. It seems like he has designs on her," Lin Xian said to the luxuriously dressed young man with a sinister smile. The luxuriously dressed young man was called Zhu Shaoan. He was one of the geniuses of the cloud-splitting divine palace. His strength was even more terrifying than Lin Xian's. Most importantly, he was one of Luo Xian's most fervent pursuers. Chapter 1445. Hovering in midair, Zhu Shaolin didn't conceal his anger at all as he fixed Nie Tian with a pair of cold eyes that emanated fierce killing intent. In his opinion, Luo Xian was a noble existence. Even if he couldn't get her, he wouldn't allow a small fry like Nie Tian to dream about her. Nie Tian sensed Zhu Shaolin's killing intent. His eyes narrowed and his face darkened. He had made it clear to Lin Xian that he didn't ask about Luo Xian because he admired her, but because he wanted revenge. Lin Xian was obviously misleading Zhu Shaolin. However, Nie Tian didn't want to explain too much. He had killed people from the cloud-splitting divine palace, so they wouldn't let him off easily. Off to the side, Zhao Zi went blank. Looking at Nie Tian with a surprised expression, he asked in a voice transmission, Nie Tian, did you really kill people from the cloud-shattering divine palace? What's there to be afraid of? Nie Tian said with a faint smile. He didn't seem to be worried at all. This. Zhao Zi was stunned. He opened his mouth but couldn't say a word. It seemed that Nie Tian had caused a lot of trouble when he went out. If Nie Tian had killed people from the cloud-splitting divine palace on the stage of the grand competition of the 12 shrines, it wouldn't have been a big deal. However, he had killed people from the cloud-splitting divine palace outside. Now that the Red Moon divine palace was weak, they didn't dare to offend them. I killed people from the cloud-splitting divine palace, and I did ask about Luo Xian. What do you want? Nie Tian raised his eyebrows and looked at Zhu Shaolin provocatively. You're courting death. Zhu Shaolin's eyes darkened and his gaze turned cold. He moved slightly and took a step forward. A violent aura pressed down on Lin Xian. Nie Tian didn't expect Lin Xian to attack him. This was the Red Moon Divine Palace, and Nie Tian was a member of the Red Moon Divine Palace. The fact that Zhu Shaolin dared to attack him in the Red Moon Divine Palace showed that the Red Moon Divine Palace had fallen. Young Master Zhu, please wait. At this moment, Zhao Zi took a step forward and stopped Zhu Shaolin. She said solemnly, "This is the Crimson Moon Divine Palace. Aren't you looking down on the Crimson Moon Divine Palace by making a move in public?" Red Moon Divine Palace? Zhu Shaolin laughed coldly. Then, he raised his voice and said, "A Shen palace that is about to be removed from the 12 shrines, does it still have the right to ask others to respect it?" As soon as Zhu Shaolin's voice fell, the surrounding people immediately roared with laughter. Everyone was certain that after the grand competition of the 12 shrine palaces, the Red Moon Divine Palace would be removed from the 12 shrine palaces. This was also the reason why the grand competition was held in the Red Moon Divine Palace. It was to quickly divide up the Red Moon Divine Palace. You! Zhao Zi's face darkened. She felt a lump of stuffiness in her heart that she couldn't swallow nor spit out. He was a member of the Crimson Moon Divine Palace. Someone had humiliated the Crimson Moon Divine Palace in public, but he was unable to do anything. Of course, he was angry. Zhao Zi was an outer sect elder of the Red Moon Divine Palace. Compared to Zhu Shaolin, he could be considered a senior. If he were to make a move, the nature of the competition would be different. It could easily lead to a head-on battle between the two shrines. Moreover, Zhao Zi knew that he might not be a match for Zhu Shaolin. At this time, the crowd of onlookers grew. One of them stared coldly at Nie Tian, wishing that he could tear him into 1,000 pieces and grind his bones into ashes. Jian Dong. Nie Tian had long noticed this person's existence. He smiled coldly in his heart. His divine sense locked onto a demonic young man next to Jian Dong. This demonic young man was very powerful. He was at the peak of the lower deity stage. His sword principle was at the sword vein realm. However, the aura of his sword intent was far stronger than Jian Dong's. "Jian Qiu, is it?" Nie Tian murmured in his heart. He had heard the crowd's discussion just now. The two names that were mentioned the most were Luo Zian and Jian Qiu. Everyone believed that these two were the strongest contenders for the lower deity chief's position in this grand competition. Jian Qiu and Jian Dong. These two names made it clear that they were brothers. However, Jian Dong and Luo Zian didn't make any moves at this time. They just looked on coldly, waiting to watch a good show. Get out of the way! Zhu Shaolin looked coldly at Zhao Zi and shouted angrily. His eyes were ruthless and bloodthirsty. Zhao Zi looked extremely embarrassed. He was an outer court elder of the Crimson Moon Divine Palace. How could he put his face after being reprimanded by a junior like this? Lord Zhao, since this person insists on fighting, you don't have to stop him. Nie Tian smiled faintly. At the same time, he transmitted his voice to Zhao Zi. Lord Zhao, this matter started because of me. I will handle it well. Nie Tian. Zhao Zi was taken aback. He looked at Nie Tian in astonishment. Judging from the latter's posture, it seemed that he really wanted to fight Zhu Shaolin. He believed that Nie Tian's talent was unparalleled, but his actual strength was really hard to say. Nie Tian, be careful, Zhao Zi, who knew Nie Tian's identity, warned him in a low voice. Don't worry. Nie Tian smiled faintly. He took a step forward and leaped into the sky. His aura was as sharp as a sword. You're courting death, Zhu Shaolin bellowed. His figure moved and charged at Nie Tian. In his opinion, there was no suspense in this battle. Given his strength, he could easily kill Nie Tian in an instant. These two are really going to fight. The eyes of the crowd couldn't help but tremble. They looked at the two in the sky with trembling faces. They were very much looking forward to the battle. Zhu Shaolin steadied his body and faced Nie Tian. A cold glint flashed across his eyes. He said coldly, Brat, you're just a mid-stage low god. How dare you have designs on junior sister Xian? You're courting death. Is that so? Nie Tianling laughed. He did not explain too much and said indifferently, even if I'm not strong enough, I'm still stronger than you. I'm afraid Luo Xian has never looked you in the eye. You're willing to be a barking dog for such a woman. That's the saddest thing. Zhu Shaolin's strength and talent were not bad, but he was absolutely not worthy of Luo Xian's attention. Zhu Shaolin, on the other hand, was willing to kill someone for the sake of an unreachable woman. If that wasn't sad, then what was? Brat, you're courting death. Zhu Shaolin's eyes instantly filled with a ferocious look as Nie Tian poked him in his sore spot. With a bellow, he thrust his palm out, sending out a torrential palm force that seemed to blot out heaven and earth. The void trembled as an enormous palm shadow smashed down towards Nie Tian. What a terrifying palm strike! Everyone felt a cold wind brushing against their faces. Their hearts couldn't help but shiver. Zhu Shaolin spared no effort in this palm strike. It was obvious that he wanted to kill Nie Tian on the spot. Zhao Zi's eyes quivered. He was extremely nervous. Bean-sized beads of sweat oozed from his forehead. Nie Tian stood tall in the sky. His eyes were as tranquil as still water, without the slightest ripple. Deadly duo of heaven and earth, kill! Just at the instant when the palm shadow was about to hit him, his silhouette abruptly moved. The sword absolute heaven slash suddenly pierced out. A sword shadow roared as it shot towards the terrifying primal chaos flames outside the berserk sword intent. Chapter 1446. What a terrifying attack! The crowd cried out in surprise when they saw the scene in the sky. No one had expected that Nie Tian would be able to penetrate Zhu Shaolin's attack with a single strike. The strength of his sword intent was unimaginable. Huh! Zhu Shaolin sensed that something was amiss. He wanted to react, but it was too late. Bang! The next moment, a muffled sound was heard in the sky. Zhu Shaolin's body flew through the air like a kite with a broken string, leaving behind a trail of blood. He smashed into the ground, creating a deep pit and stirring up waves of dust. Countless eyes were fixed on the deep pit on the ground. There was a deathly silence. Zhu Shaolin had been defeated, and he had been defeated so cleanly. This result was beyond anyone's imagination. They had no idea how a mid-stage low god could burst out with such terrifying energy. Senior Zhu. A terrified roar was heard after a long while. Lin Xian moved to Zhu Shaolin's side and helped him up. Zhu Shaolin was no longer as arrogant as he was before. His face was pale and wretched. He raised his head and glared at Nie Tian. His eyes were trembling and he couldn't say a word. He couldn't figure out how he had been defeated in such an inexplicable way. Nie Tian stood tall in the sky, his eyes sweeping across the crowd on the ground. He seemed to be looking for someone, but he couldn't find him. Luo Zian, it seems that you won't show up for the time being, Nie Tian muttered, the corner of his mouth twitching. Countless eyes were fixed on Nie Tian. Some were surprised, some were puzzled, but most of them were terrified. Big brother, this kid's strength is too strange, Jian Dong said in a deep voice, his eyes trembling. Yes. The ominous young man next to him nodded and said, although his swordsmanship realm is only at the sword pattern realm, the power of his sword intent is very strong. It's much stronger than the average sword range cultivators. It's not an injustice that you lost to him. Big brother, can you defeat him with your strength? Jian Dong's eyes flickered and he asked directly. We'll know once we try. The demonic young man's lips curled into a cold smile. His silhouette flickered as he leapt up into the air. Someone else has appeared. The crowd suddenly saw someone rushing into the sky. Their eyes trembled and they shouted excitedly. It's him. Just as Nie Tian was about to leave, he saw a young man with a devilish appearance. He immediately recognized him as the man who had been standing beside Jian Dong. Nie Tian took a look at him and said with a plain tone, "What can I do for you?" Nie Tian had once almost killed Jian Dong. He had long known that the people of Heaven's Sword Divine Palace would not let him go, but he had not expected them to appear directly. I am Jian Chun, a member of the Heaven's Sword Divine Palace. Sir, you are very strong. I would like to experience it for myself, Jian Chun said coolly. There was a sinister look in his eyes. Jian Chun? Nie Tian's heart sank when he heard this name. He had guessed that this person might be the Jian Qiu that everyone was talking about, but he did not expect that this person was not Jian Qiu. Jian Chun's strength was far more terrifying than Jian Dong's. Based on this, it could be inferred that Jian Qiu's strength must be even stronger. He is Jian Chun. The crowd below was stunned when they heard Jian Chun's name, and they exclaimed. In the Heaven Sword Divine Palace, there were 4 brothers of the Jian family, Jian Chun, Jian Xia, Jian Qiu, and Jian Dong. They were all talented swordsmen. Among them, Jian Qiu's talent in swordsmanship was the most terrifying, far surpassing the other 3. And Jian Chun was the eldest of the 4 brothers of the Jian family. His strength was second only to Jian Qiu. How do you want to experience it? Nie Tian smiled faintly and his eyes flickered. One sword to determine the winner, Jian Chun said in a deep voice. Jian Chun said in a deep voice. A green longsword appeared in his hand. It looked like a green snake and it was covered with thorns. At the same time, it released circles of green mist. Poison! When Nie Tian saw the green longsword, he could not help but tremble. He immediately felt the pungent smell. It was obvious that Jian Chun's sword was poisonous. It was not common for a swordsman to use a poisoned sword. All right, as you wish. One sword to decide the winner. The next moment, Nie Tian became cold and smiled faintly. Zhao Zi heard Nie Tian's words from below and his face immediately darkened. He was extremely embarrassed. He knew that Jian Chun was not someone Zhu Shaolin could compare to. This person was a genius swordsman of the Heaven Sword Divine Palace. Among the younger generation, his strength and talent were second only to Jian Qiu. It was not an exaggeration to say that Jian Chun's strength was enough to kill Zhao Zi with one sword. Zhao Zi even suspected that if Nie Tian and Jian Chun clashed, it was unknown whether or not he could survive. Good spirit. Jian Chun smiled coldly. He then raised his longsword and said faintly, "My sword spirit is called the thorny flying snake. My sword will contains thorny snake venom. You have to be careful. Make your move." Nie Tian smiled faintly and raised his heaven/sword. The crowd's eyes were burning. They did not even blink for fear that they would miss something interesting. 10,000 snake thorns. Jian Chun's face suddenly darkened. Then, the thorny flying snake suddenly pierced forward. A sea of green mist appeared in the void and turned into billowing waves, pressing towards Nie Tian. Nie Tian's eyes flashed coldly. He saw that in the sea of green mist, there were small green snakes dancing wildly, flicking their tongues and releasing the terrifying thorny snake venom. What a vicious sword! Nie Tian frowned slightly and said in his heart, "Not only is this person strong and talented, but his temperament is also sinister. Relying on the suppression of his sword Dao realm, he wants me to take a sword from him." Jian Chun's sword Dao strength was above Nie Tian's. This sword of his was not to kill Nie Tian, but to injure Nie Tian. With such a large-scale attack, Nie Tian could not avoid it and could only take it head-on. And Jian Chun did not think that Nie Tian could withstand the invasion of the thorny snake venom. The silver-haired boy is in danger. Among the crowd, some of the stronger martial artists saw the clues. They frowned and secretly said in their hearts, in their opinion, after this sword, even if Nie Tian did not die, he would be seriously injured. "Well, since you want to fight head-on, then I will accompany you." Nie Tian instantly calmed down. His eyes trembled slightly, and then the sword intent in his body surged out. The power of the sword lines actually connected in the air and condensed into strange runes. In the blink of an eye, countless sword patterns and magical symbols surged madly, forming an enormous sword formation that enveloped Nie Tian. "High God Sword Array, let me see your power." The corner of Nie Tian's mouth trembled slightly and a smile appeared on his face. High God Sword Array, the third sword array in the proud sword art. Ever since Nie Tian was reborn, he had never used this sword array. In his previous life, he had also used the High God Sword Array, but he always felt that it was not as powerful as the other two sword arrays. It was not until his sword Dao realm was raised to the sword pattern realm did he understand that the High God Sword Array needed to be condensed from sword lines. Only after reaching the sword pattern realm could the power of the High God Sword Array be truly displayed. Chapter 1447. Bang Bang Bang. Above the void, countless green snakes bombarded the High God Sword formation. Immediately after, like maggots in a tarsal bone, they began to crazily invade the sword formation. Under the invasion of the green snakes, the High God Sword formation instantly became shaky. "Stinking brat, let me see how long you can last." Jian Chun laughed sinisterly. Immediately, more green snakes surged out from the sea of green fog and attacked the High God Sword formation even more crazily. What two terrifying people! Seeing this, the crowd's eyes trembled violently. They did not expect that the sword fight between Nie Tian and Jian Chun would be so terrifying. Nie Tian's figure stood in the sword formation. His entire body surged with terrifying sword inscriptions. He did not care about the attacks of the green snakes at all. At this moment, he was using the High God Sword formation to absorb the power of heaven and earth. Your own strength is not enough. You want to borrow the sword formation to absorb the power of heaven and earth? Ridiculous. Of course, Jian Chun could see this point. However, he sneered and his eyes became cold and stern. He would not give Nie Tian too much time. Boom. Just at this moment, the sea of green fog suddenly shook violently. Following that, countless green snakes surged out and turned into green runes. In an instant, they condensed into a huge green snake that was 1,000 meters long. Its imposing manner shook the heaven and earth, as it charged towards Nie Tian. Oh no! Seeing this scene, Zhao Zi's eyes trembled and his face turned pale. Everyone else's eyes turned cold and their hearts were overwhelmed with shock. It was as if they could see the tragic scene of Nie Tian being swallowed by the huge green snake. High up in the sky, Nie Tian's face was as calm as water. There was not the slightest ripple on his face. This is the time. Just as the huge green snake was about to collide with the high god sword formation, Nie Tian's mouth trembled and he muttered. In the next moment, the high god sword formation suddenly shook. Immediately, all the sword inscriptions gathered and a huge sword was formed. It was actually 2,000 meters long. In front of the huge high god sword, the huge green snake seemed very small. Kill! The corner of Nie Tian's mouth twitched as he let out a low roar. The divine spirit sword slashed downwards and with a bang, the giant green snake was sliced in half. Hiss! The sudden reversal made everyone suck in a breath of cold air. Who would have thought that Nie Tian could actually explode with such terrifying power in a desperate situation? How is this possible? Jian Chun was stunned as well, and she was extremely astonished. She hadn't expected this scene at all. Boom! In the next moment, the sword of the soaring god descended once again. The green sea of mist was actually directly split apart, violently splitting into two. Jian Chun's eyes trembled, and he reacted quickly. His body moved, and a green shield appeared around him. Bang! With a muffled sound, the spirit god sword fell, and the green shield on Jian Chun's body actually broke in response. He immediately felt an extremely swift and fierce power descend. He wanted to resist, but it was already too late. Swoosh! The swift and fierce sword shadow fell, and Jian Chun's body flew out. One of his arms was actually directly cut off, and fresh blood dripped down. It was extremely tragic. The tragic scene made everyone's eyes tremble, and they were stunned. The whole place once again fell into a deathly silence, and the atmosphere was so oppressive that it was suffocating. Jian Chun, the genius swordsman of the Heaven Sword Divine Palace, was actually defeated by the hands of Nie Tian once again. The crowd only knew at this time that Zhu Shaowen's defeat by Nie Tian was not a coincidence at all. In the battle just now, Nie Tian didn't use his full strength at all. Otherwise, Zhu Shaowen would already be a corpse. The shock that Nie Tian brought to the crowd was too great, and it was indescribable. Zhao Zi stared blankly at Nie Tian, and he completely didn't know how to express the shock in his heart. At this moment, he finally believed that Nie Tian really had the strength to compete for the title of the lower god chief. High up in the sky, Nie Tian's figure stood upright. His face was as pale as paper, but his eyes were still sharp. Using the high divine sword formation consumed a large amount of spirit power and sword pattern, and it was not a small burden to him. Jian Chun, one sword strike is over, and the winner and loser are already decided, Nie Tian said indifferently as he raised his head slightly and looked at Jian Chun in the distance. After one sword strike, Nie Tian was completely unscathed, but Jian Chun had lost an arm. The winner and loser were already very obvious. Jian Chun stood trembling in midair, and his arm had already stopped bleeding. However, his eyes were extremely stern, and he looked at Nie Tian with unwillingness and incomparable resentment. He didn't expect that the sword formation that Nie Tian used would actually be so terrifying. At this moment, several figures suddenly appeared high up in the sky. Each of them had an extremely powerful aura, and their faces were filled with shock that was hard to conceal. Nie Tian suddenly raised his head and looked at those figures. He immediately recognized one of them. It was the palace master of the Red Moon Divine Palace, Qi Yefeng. Beside Qi Yefeng stood two green-robed elders and a young martial artist. The aura of those two elders was not below Qi Yefeng. It's the palace masters of the various divine palaces. The crowd on the ground was also attracted by the people in the sky and exclaimed. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed, and he immediately understood. No wonder these people's aura were so powerful. They were the palace masters of the other divine palaces. Red Moon Palace Master, it seems that your Red Moon Divine Palace has been hiding its strength. I didn't expect such a terrifying person to appear. It has really opened my eyes. Beside Qi Yifeng, a tall and lean elder spoke faintly, but his tone was very unfriendly. This person was the palace master of the Medicine King Divine Palace, Yao Chen. Qi Yifeng glanced at Nie Tian, and he didn't seem very happy. He smiled awkwardly and didn't say anything. This boy can actually defeat Jian Chun. It seems that he does have some strength. Another elder, whose face was so gloomy that it was almost dripping water, smiled cold, and then said to the young martial artist next to him, Jian Xiu, go down and have a taste of this person's strength. Heaven Sword Palace Master, Nie Tian just finished his battle with Jian Chun. Right now, he is in an extremely bad state. How can he fight with nephew Jian Xiu? Qi Yifeng was suddenly stunned, but he immediately reacted and said hurriedly, It will be the day of the grand competition in a few days. It won't be too late to fight then. This gloomy elder was none other than the palace master of the Heaven Sword Divine Palace, Jian Wuya. And the young swordsman next to him was the #1 genius of the Heaven Sword Divine Palace, Jian Qiu. Nie Tian had defeated the genius of the sword principal of the Heaven Sword Divine Palace in public, which made him, as the palace master, lose face. Therefore, he wanted Jian Qiu to directly kill Nie Tian. Master, this person has already fought once. If we fight now, I'm afraid that others will say that the Heaven Sword Divine Palace took advantage of him. Jian Qiu's eyes narrowed slightly, and he looked cold at Nie Tian. Then, he said, in order not to be criticized, I want to fight with a disciple of the Red Moon Divine Palace first, and then fight with this person. All right. Jian Wuya laughed, then looked at Qi Yifeng and said, Palace Master, choose a disciple of the Red Moon Divine Palace. Let him fight with Jian Qiu first, and then let Jian Qiu fight with Nie Tian. This. Qi Yifeng was stunned, and his face was extremely ugly. He didn't expect Jian Wuya and his disciple to be so arrogant and overbearing. No one from the Red Moon Divine Palace was a match for Jian Qiu. They clearly wanted to embarrass the Red Moon Divine Palace. When Nie Tian heard Jian Wuya and his disciple's words, he also frowned. This pair of master and disciple, one was more cunning than the other. Jian Wuya, the day of the grand competition of the 12 shrines hasn't arrived yet. It doesn't seem appropriate to let them fight now. At that moment, a voice sounded in the void, and it actually called Jian Wuya's name. Then, a figure in black appeared and descended beside Jian Wuya and the others. Chapter 1448. The Heartbroken Young Master. When Nie Tian saw the person's face, he could not help but be stunned. He felt strange. Why would the heartbroken young master appear here? The heartbroken young master's appearance immediately caused everyone to discuss. Who is he? You actually dare to directly call the Heaven Sword Palace Master's name. This person's presence is very powerful. He's no weaker than the Palace Masters. He should be the Palace Master of another divine palace. This guy looks very overbearing. I wonder how the Heaven Sword Palace Master will react. The crowd discussed softly as they stared at the sky. They seemed to be waiting for the heartbroken young master and Jian Wuya to fight. It was rare to see a battle between overgods. At this moment, Nie Tian's brows were also furrowed. Who exactly was the heartbroken young master? He actually didn't even care about the palace lords of the divine palaces. Young Master Yu. The Heaven Sword Palace Master was stunned. He then looked at the heartbroken young master. He was extremely surprised and even fearful. He said, Young Master Yu, why are you here? Young Master Yu. The Heaven Sword Palace Master was extremely polite to the heartbroken young master. He was even slightly fearful. The heartbroken young master smiled faintly. He did not say anything. Instead, he took out a jade tablet and showed it to Jian Wuya and the others. he said, "Palace Masters, do you know why I'm here now? A sacred assembly token." Jian Wuya and the others were stunned when they saw the jade tablet. They seemed to have seen something extremely terrifying. Nie Tian could not help but narrow his eyes when he saw this. He did not know what the jade tablet was to make Jian Wuya and the others so fearful. "My lord, are you the holy judge of this divine palace competition?" Qi Yefeng was the first to react. He clearly did not know the heartbroken young master, but he knew the meaning behind the word jade. He immediately bowed slightly and spoke politely. "That's right. I am the holy judge of this divine realm competition." The heartbroken young master nodded slightly, but his face was rather gloomy. "Greetings, Lord Holy Judge." Jian Wuya and the others all returned to their senses and bowed politely. When the others saw the palace lord's reactions, they couldn't help being stunned. They had no idea what was going on. They were all trying to guess just who this black-robed man was to be able to make the palace lords bow to him. Nie Tian's gaze trembled. He thought to himself, "Prince Heartbroken has such a powerful background. This holy arbiter must have a very high status." The heartbroken prince waved his hand slightly and said, "Let's stop here for today. If you want to fight, wait until the grand competition." "Yes." Jian Wuya's eyes flickered, but he did not dare to disobey the heartbroken prince. He nodded respectfully, acting like a subordinate. At the side, Autumn Sword glared at Nie Tian and said sinisterly in his heart, "Brat, consider yourself lucky this time. If you meet me during the competition, I'll definitely kill you." Autumn Sword was a strong contender for the title of Lesser God Chief in this Divine Palace competition. Although he had seen Nie Tian defeat Jian Chun, he still did not take Nie Tian seriously. His strength was definitely not something Jian Chun could compare to. Nie Tian sensed the killing intent from Autumn Sword, but he only smiled faintly and did not care. At this moment, he only wanted to say one thing to Autumn Sword: "There are many people who want to kill me, but who do you think you are?" Because of the heartbroken prince's arrival, the storm calmed down. The palace lords left together with the heartbroken prince, leaving the crowd dumbfounded. Only then did Jiandong suddenly remember something. He exclaimed, "That holy arbiter, I think I've seen him before." Of course he had seen the heartbroken prince before. When he was fighting with Nie Tian, the Jian family's secret guards had intervened. It was the heartbroken prince who had appeared and saved Nie Tian. Jiandong recalled everything and suddenly looked at Nie Tian. His eyes were filled with terror. He did not know the relationship between Nie Tian and the Holy Arbiter, but he could tell that the Holy Arbiter had saved Nie Tian again. "Lord Zhao, we're leaving." Nie Tian did not pay attention to Jiandong. He landed on the ground and said a few words to Zhao Zi before leaving with Cher and Ed. After a while, Nie Tian arrived at the Crimson Moon Divine Palace. He had Cher take Ed back to their lodgings while he went to the Stargazing Grand Hall. Nie Tian had some questions in his mind that he needed to ask Songyu. "Nie Tian, you're back." In the Stargazing Grand Hall, Songyu was overjoyed to see Nie Tian. However, when he sensed Nie Tian's strength, his face was filled with shock and astonishment. He was speechless for a long time. "Elder Tsang, I've already broken through to the Low God realm. I'm afraid I can only participate in the Low God realm." Nie Tian smiled bitterly and said, "But don't worry, even if I participate in the Low God realm, I'll still be the champion." Songyu listened to Nie Tian's words and felt the determination in his eyes. He could not help but gulp. He did not know what had just happened, so he did not understand Nie Tian's strength. He was also skeptical of Nie Tian's words. "Elder Tsang, I have something to ask you." Nie Tian did not explain too much to Songyu. He said directly, "Just now, several palace masters of the divine palaces appeared, and a holy arbiter appeared. I want to know who the holy arbiter is." "The holy arbiter arrived?" Songyu was stunned. He was obviously very surprised. "Yes." Nie Tian nodded slightly and said, "Who is this holy arbiter? Why are the palace masters so respectful to him?" The holy arbiter. Song Yu was shocked. It took a long time for him to calm down. He suddenly asked, "Nie Tian, have you heard of the Holy Parliament?" The Holy Parliament? Nie Tian was slightly stunned and shook his head. Song Yu smiled and said, "The Holy Parliament is a supreme force jointly established by the 9 major realms. The peak forces of the upper realms all have a place in the Holy Parliament. Any big matter in the 9 major realms must be presided over by the Holy Parliament. The emissary of the Holy Parliament is the Holy Arbiter." "I see." Nie Tian's brows sank slightly. He roughly understood. The Holy Parliament seemed to be a powerful force formed by many peak forces. To be able to make so many powerful forces bow their heads, the person who established the Holy Parliament was definitely an existence close to the sage level. The heartbroken prince was a member of the Holy Parliament. No wonder Jian Huia and the others were so respectful to him. "Nie Tian, who is the Holy Arbiter this time? Do you know?" Song Yu didn't explain too much to Nie Tian, but asked with interest. "I've seen this person. He calls himself the Heartbroken Prince, but the Heaven Sword Palace Master calls him Young Master Yu. He should be someone with the surname Yu." Nie Tian smiled slightly and didn't tell Song Yu what happened between him and the Heartbroken Prince. "Someone from the Yu family." Song Yu's eyes trembled slightly. "The Yu family?" Nie Tian was stunned for a moment and said, "Is the Yu family very strong?" "The Yu family is one of the 9 great families of creation." "Of course they are strong," Song Yu exclaimed. "I really didn't expect the Holy Parliament to send someone from the Yu family. With this person in charge, the grand competition of the 12 shrines should be very fair. The 9 great families of creation." Nie Tian's eyes trembled when he heard Song Yu mention this name. Chapter 1449. In the stargazing hall, Nie Tian's expression was a little strange. He didn't expect that the Yu family of the Heartbroken Prince was one of the 9 great families. Since the Yu family was one of the 9 great families like the Nie family, then even if it wasn't as strong as the Nie family, it shouldn't be much weaker. Song Yu glanced at Nie Tian. He didn't know Nie Tian's identity, and thought that Nie Tian was only shocked by his identity as a divine adjudicator. Next, Nie Tian asked Song Yu about the grand competition of the 12 shrines. He asked Song Yu to tell Qi Yefeng that he would definitely win the Lesser God Chief position. After leaving the stargazing hall, Nie Tian immediately returned to his residence. Cher and Ed were waiting for him in the small courtyard. "Nie Tian, Sister Rushi is still in seclusion." Cher smiled faintly when she saw Nie Tian, but there was a hint of worry in her eyes. Nie Tian nodded slightly. He looked at Mo Rushi's room and felt relieved when he didn't notice anything unusual. He learned from Song Yu that the grand competition of the 12 shrines would take about half a month. The first 5 days were for the heavenly emperors, while the last 10 days were for the lesser god martial artists. Although the heavenly emperor martial artists competition was important, it wasn't the most crucial. The most important thing was the lesser god martial artists competition. As long as Nie Tian won the lesser god chief position, the Crimson Lunar Divine Palace wouldn't be at the bottom anymore. Nie Tian. 2 figures appeared at this time. They were Mo Qianjun and Jiu Qianxing. The 2 rushed over immediately when they heard that Nie Tian had returned. "Brother Mo, Brother Jiu." Nie Tian looked at the 2 and probed them with his divine sense. He smiled in relief and said, "Congratulations on successfully condensing your godhead and advancing to the god realm." Mo Qianjun and Jiu Qianxing had already condensed their godheads and advanced to the lesser god realm. The 2 looked at each other and smiled. When they sensed Nie Tian's aura, they were dumbfounded. Originally, they had thought that the speed at which they formed their godheads was already freakishly fast. Who would have thought that Nie Tian was even more freakishly fast? Mo Qianjun and Jiu Qianxing could condense their godheads so quickly because of the earthworm crystals. In the past, Wei Jinren and the others did not use up the Wang family's earth silkworm crystals. Qi Yifeng gave some to Mo Qianjun and Jiu Qianxing to help them advance to the God realm as soon as possible. Nie Tian and the other two chatted for a long time. Jiu Qianxing's eyes flickered as he suddenly asked, Nie Tian, Lord Palace Master has allowed us to participate in the Lesser God Realm Martial Artists competition. What is the strength of the other Divine Palace's martial artists? What? Nie Tian was taken aback. He didn't expect that Qi Yifeng would allow Mo Qianjun and Jiu Qianxing to participate in the Divine Palace competition. They had just advanced to the God Realm. They couldn't be compared to those who had been in the Lesser God Realm for a long time. Brother Mo, Brother Jiu, Nie Tian's eyes trembled and he suddenly said, I want you to leave Red Lunar Divine Palace right now. Leave Red Lunar Divine Palace? Mo Qianjun and Jiu Qianxing were stunned. They looked at Nie Tian in confusion and asked, Why? Nie Tian's eyes turned cautious. He scanned the surroundings with the divine glyphs to make sure there was no one else around. He then said, Qi Yifeng isn't as simple as he looks. You saw how he killed Long Wei. He wants you to participate in the Divine Palace competition just to make use of you. He doesn't care about your lives. Red Lunar Divine Palace is not a place to stay for long. You must leave as soon as possible. This. Mo Qianjuan's expression darkened. He was a meticulous person, and he had long since noticed that Crimson Moon Feng was not an ordinary person. However, because it was Nie Tian who had brought them to the Crimson Moon Divine Palace, he didn't say anything. Now that Nie Tian had pointed out that Qi Yifeng was a ferocious person, Mo Qianjun was even more determined. Jiu Qianxing wasn't a fool. He had seen many clues about what happened that day. He immediately became silent. Nie Tian, will you leave with us? Mo Qianjun looked at Nie Tian and said in a deep voice, I can't leave now. Nie Tian smiled and said, But don't worry, Qi Yifeng won't dare to do anything to me. Of course, Nie Tian couldn't leave right now, because if he did, the Heaven Realm's God domain would be destroyed. Moreover, he wanted to meet the geniuses of the Heaven World. Luo Zian was also participating in the grand competition of the 12 shrines. Nie Tian, if we leave suddenly and Qi Yifeng finds out, will he harm you? Mo Qianjun frowned and said in a deep voice, Don't worry. I have Old Hai's support. Unless Qi Yifeng doesn't want to live anymore, he won't dare to touch me. Nie Tian smiled and said indifferently, All right, let's not waste any more time. We'll leave now. Mo Qianjun and Jiu Qianxing looked at each other. They didn't hesitate anymore and prepared to leave. Brother Mo, Brother Jiu, take care. Nie Tian rose to his feet, a somewhat grim expression on his face. He didn't know when they would meet again after today. But he believed that with Mo Qianjun and Jiu Qianxing's strength, it wouldn't be a problem for them to survive in the territory. He hoped that the next time they met, the three of them would be able to reach a new peak of the Sword Dao. Take care. Mo Qianjun and Jiu Qianxing nodded. Without wasting any more time, they leaped into the sky and left. Do you want to leave? However, just as the two of them leaped up into the sky, a low voice rang out. Immediately after, a figure appeared and ruthlessly slapped down with his palm. Instantly, a vast and mighty palm energy came crashing down on Mo Qianjun and Jiu Qianxing. Mo Qianjun and Jiu Qianxing felt that something was wrong. They reacted quickly and stabbed with their sword. Then, they quickly retreated. Bang! Bang! Although the two of them reacted quickly, they were still one step too late. After two muffled sounds, the two of them fell to the ground, leaving a trail of blood in the air. Brother Mo, Brother Jiu. Nie Tian's eyes trembled when he saw this. He spread his wings and moved to catch the two of them. Mo Qianjun, Jiu Qianxing, are you leaving the Red Moon Divine Palace? Then, the figure stepped out and stood in the sky. He looked at Nie Tian and the others with a murderous expression. "Thousand Flowing Killer, it's you." Nie Tian suddenly raised his head to look at the person and shouted in a cold voice. He used his consciousness to sense Mo Qianjun and Jiu Qiansheng. Both of them were injured, but not seriously. Their lives were not in danger. Although Thousand Flowing Killer possessed the strength of a mid-stage low god, it was still impossible for him to kill Mo Qianjun and Jiu Qiansheng in an instant. Nie Tian took out 2 divine pellets and fed them to the two. Their complexions immediately improved. Nie Tian did not expect that Thousand Flowing Killer would appear at this moment. He suddenly raised his head and looked at Thousand Flowing Killer with murderous eyes. The corners of his mouth moved and he coldly spat out 2 words, "Get out of my way!" "What if I don't?" Thousand Flowing Killer sneered. He was not afraid at all. Instead, he was very provocative. "Die." Nie Tian's body moved. He took a step forward and his aura soared. "Nie Tian, long time no see." It was at this moment that the void behind Thousand Flowing Killer suddenly trembled. A figure appeared. That figure spoke in a cold voice. Chapter 1450. Shui Wushuang. In the air, Nie Tian stared coldly at the newcomer, and his eyes couldn't help but tremble. No wonder Qian Lu Sha was so arrogant. It turned out that Shui Wushuang was behind him. Shui Wushuang, the son of the Snow Empress, was a martial arts genius second only to Nie Tian back in the Heaven Realm. He had entered the astonishing god territory 100 years ago and had quickly formed his godhead to advance to the immortal realm. He had been cultivating hard for the grand competition of the 12 shrines. His strength had already reached the peak of the lower god realm. Shui Wushuang had already learned everything. He hated Nie Tian to the core. Back in the Heaven Realm, he had been suppressed by Nie Tian. He had been extremely unhappy with Nie Tian ever since. Now that Nie Tian had killed his father, there was no way he would let Nie Tian go. "Nie Tian, you're finally back." Shui Wushuang hovered in the sky. His body was surrounded by a terrifying icy aura. His eyes were filled with killing intent. Shui Wushuang. Mo Qianjun and Jiu Qiansheng's eyes trembled when they saw his face. They could not hide the fear on their faces. They knew that Shui Wushuang's martial arts talent was terrifying. He had entered the territory 100 years earlier than Nie Tian. His current strength must be terrifying. Would Nie Tian be a match for him? Nie Tian's expression was calm. He looked at Shui Wushuang calmly and said with a smile, "Shui Wushuang, do you want to avenge the Snow Empress? My father's death is irreconcilable. Today, either you die or I die." Shui Wushuang said coldly. He stared at Nie Tian with bloodthirsty eyes. He wanted to kill the latter 1,000 times. Although Qi Yefeng had sent someone to tell him that the grudge between him and Nie Tian would be settled after the grand competition of the 12 shrines, he could not wait any longer. The longer Nie Tian lived, the more furious he became. The Snow Empress deserved to die. It's reasonable for you to want to avenge your father. However, if you think that I will die in your hands, then you are completely wrong. Nie Tianling sneered and leaped into the sky, standing opposite of Shui Wushuang. The Snow Empress was the main culprit behind Nie Tian's death. Nie Tian couldn't be blamed for killing the Snow Empress. There was nothing wrong with Shui Wushuang avenging her father. Nie Tian and Shui Wushuang were already on opposite sides. A battle of life and death was unavoidable. Nie Tian, even though you've lived 2 lives, you're still as arrogant as ever. I'm already at the peak of the low-level deity stage. How are you going to fight me? Shui Wushuang roared furiously. Her body trembled and a frosty aura was released from her body. A sharp ice claw appeared in the void and pierced through the air, fiercely grabbing at Nie Tian. Crack, crack, crack. Wherever the ice claws passed, the space was directly frozen, and the sky was filled with frost. Do you really think you can kill me with this? Nie Tian smiled faintly. Then, he thrust out his long sword. The sky was filled with sword shadows that whistled out and pressed down on Shui Wushuang. Boom! Crack! In the void, the ice claws collided with the countless sword shadows. With a loud explosion, the ice claws suddenly collapsed. A terrifying chill spread out and wreaked havoc in the space. Nie Tian took a step forward and a ball of flame surged out of his body, dispersing the chill in the space. Seeing this, Shui Wushuang was slightly stunned. Her eyes trembled a bit, but then she laughed and said, Nie Tian, you didn't let me down. It seems that I underestimated you. Thousand Flowing Kill was also stunned. He didn't expect that Nie Tian would dare to fight Shui Wushuang head-on. At this moment, he realized that Nie Tian's strength had already reached the middle stage low-level deity stage, just like him. When Thousand Flowing Kill realized this, he was completely stunned. He had only reached the middle stage low-level deity stage for more than 100 years. Nie Tian had also reached the middle stage low-level deity stage in less than 3 months. In comparison, Thousand Flowing Kill's talent was simply trash. In fact, it wasn't that Thousand Flowing Kill was trash. It was that Nie Tian was too abnormal. Mo Qianjun and Jiuqian Sheng looked at each other in shock. They didn't expect that Nie Tian's strength would be so terrifying. The two of them smiled bitterly as they realized that the gap between them and Nie Tian was growing wider and wider. At this moment, the battle between Nie Tian and Shui Wushuang had startled many people. Countless eyes were fixed on the sky with astonished expressions. Many people recognized Shui Wushuang and started to discuss. Why is Shui Wushuang fighting with that silver-haired boy? Isn't that silver-haired boy from our red lunar divine palace? They are both from the planar world. It seems that silver-haired boy killed Shui Wushuang's father. No wonder Shui Wushuang wants to kill him. At this moment, someone quickly informed the higher-ups of the red lunar divine palace. Shui Wushuang, if that's all you have, you can't kill me. Nie Tian smiled faintly and said in a mocking tone. You're courting death. Shui Wushuang frowned. His face was extremely gloomy. He shook his body and released a boundless chill. The space within a few thousand meters around him turned into a world of ice and frost. Kill! In the next moment, Shui Wushuang let out a deafening roar, and the frost aura around her morphed into countless sharp ice blades that shot down towards Nie Tian like thousands of arrows. What a terrifying frost power! The crowd's eyes darkened. Although they were tens of thousands of meters away, they could still feel a bone-piercing chill in their hearts. Shui Wushuang's strength was indeed terrifying. He was able to unleash such a terrifying force. Nie Tian frowned slightly. Then, his sword essence gushed out. The sword radiance in the sky shone brightly. Boom! The majestic sword intent instantly condensed, and a 2,000-meter-long sword shadow appeared. Like a prehistoric giant beast, it ferociously charged towards the endless ice blades. Kaboom! After a loud noise, there was an ear-piercing sound in the air. The ice blades penetrated into the huge sword shadow. In an instant, the huge sword shadow was frozen. Bang! Then, with a loud noise, the sword shadow collapsed in the air. Boundless sword essence and cold air dispersed in the air. Nie Tian was forced to retreat a few hundred meters. His body shook and dispersed the coldness in the air. Shui Wushuang was indeed terrifying. His strength was beyond Nie Tian's expectation. Nie Tian estimated that Shui Wushuang's strength was even stronger than Jian Chun from the Sky Sword Divine Palace. At this moment, Nie Tian's strength had not fully recovered. If he fought with Shui Wushuang, it would be very bad. Huh! Shui Wushuang repelled Nie Tian with one move. His eyes were not filled with joy but surprise. Originally, he had assumed that even if Nie Tian didn't die, he would at least sustain severe injuries. However, to his surprise, not only was Nie Tian still alive, but he also didn't sustain any serious injuries. Shui Wushuang, what else do you have? Show me. Nie Tian steadied himself and smiled. His eyes were firm. Nie Tian, you're courting death. Xue Wushuang was enraged. He could no longer suppress his murderous intent. He suddenly stretched out his right arm, and a golden vortex appeared on his palm. The vortex surged and released a strong murderous intent. Chapter 1451. Saint's Power. Nie Tian's expression changed when he sensed the aura of a saint's power from the golden whirlpool on Xue Wushuang's palm. Could Xue Wushuang have fused with a saint's bone like the Snow Empress? Nie Tian, you forced me to do this, Xue Wushuang said Nie Tian coldly. His handsome face turned ferocious. Nie Tian was right. The whirlpool on his palm was indeed the power of a saint, and it came from the saint's bone. However, Xue Wushuang's saint's bone was completely different from the Snow Empress. The Snow Empress saint's bone was fused with the Snowcloud sacred body, while Xue Wushuang's saint's bone was innate. Yes, Xue Wushuang's saint's bone was innate. It was also a type of spiritual body. Although the Snow Empress had fused with the Snowcloud sacred body perfectly, the fusion did not belong to her. She could not fully unleash the power of the saint's bone. However, Xue Wushuang's saint's bone was different. It was innate, which meant it had fused with his body. It was his own power. Under such circumstances, Xue Wushuang's saint's bone was much stronger than the Snow Empress. Xue Wushuang, do you really think I'm afraid of you? Nie Tianling sneered. He did not use his full strength in the previous two attacks. If Xue Wushuang really wanted to fight to the death, he could only fight him to the end. As soon as Nie Tian finished speaking, a huge dragon aura surged out from behind him. It instantly turned into a sea of lightning that stretched for tens of thousands of meters. The entire sky was filled with the power of lightning. Facing Xue Wushuang's saint's arm, Nie Tian planned to use the Sovereign Dragon Meridian to fight it. The Sovereign Dragon Meridian and the power of the Chaotic Flame should be enough to block the saint's arm, Nie Tian murmured. A ball of chaotic flame surged out of his palm. It was the Chaotic Flame. What a terrifying dragon aura! The crowd below could feel the majestic dragon aura. They did not expect Nie Tian to have such a terrifying power hidden in his body. Nie Tian, you're indeed very strong, but it's a pity that you ran into me. I was born with a sage bone. Even a mid-stage mid-deity would find it hard to resist my punch. You only have the strength of a mid-stage low deity. What makes you think you can withstand my sage arm? Xue Wushuang said fiercely. She took a step forward and the golden vortex on her palm suddenly flew out. It suddenly expanded in mid-air and became 1,000 meters large in an instant. It released a dazzling golden light like the sun. An incomparably blazing saint light was released, instantly illuminating the entire world. Under the intense light, the crowd could barely open their eyes. Such powerful strength! Nie Tian frowned and his eyes trembled. Xue Wushuang's saint power was far superior to that of the Snow Empress. Nie Tian knew that the next move would be a life-or-death move. He didn't dare to hold back anymore. The 9 dragon veins in his body circulated wildly, releasing even more berserk dragon chi. Roar! In the next moment, a gigantic crimson golden dragon that was thousands of meters long appeared. It raised its head to the sky and roared angrily, causing heaven and earth to tremble. Nie Tian raised his palm and the chaotic flame flew out and surged around the crimson golden dragon. The entire dragon was instantly enveloped by the chaotic flame as if it was burning. What a terrifying duo! The crowd was extremely shocked when they saw the scene in the sky. It was hard to imagine that this was a duel between 2 low deities. Nie Tian, let's fight to the death. Xue Wushuang's eyes flickered when he saw the crimson golden fiery dragon behind Nie Tian. The killing intent in his eyes became more intense. He suddenly realized that Nie Tian was too terrifying. He had only been in the territory for 3 months, but he had already grown to such a terrifying level. If he was allowed to continue to grow, his strength would be unimaginable in the future. Xue Wushuang vaguely felt that this was the best opportunity for him to kill Nie Tian. If he missed this chance, it would be impossible to kill Nye Tian in the future. Kill! At this thought, the killing intent in Shui Wushuang's eyes became even more intense. He roared, and the golden vortex that looked like a scorching sun whizzed out and dashed toward Nye Tian like a giant fireball. Nye Tian's eyes trembled. Without any hesitation, the crimson golden dragon behind him flew out and met the attack. At this moment, Shui Wushuang's eyes were fixed on the sky. His eyes were trembling violently and his expression was dull. Boom! Boom! In the void, a loud roar was heard. The golden vortex and the crimson golden dragon were rushing at an extremely fast speed and were about to collide. However, at this moment, a sudden change occurred. Stop! A low roar was heard in the void. Then, a figure appeared, standing between the golden vortex and the crimson golden dragon. The figure threw out a palm from both sides. The illusory palm shadows appeared. They did not seem to have much power, but strangely, the golden vortex and the crimson golden dragon were blocked by the two palm shadows. The violent power fused with the palm shadows and disappeared. Nye Tian and Shui Wushuang were stunned at the same time. They looked at the figure and cried out, "Palace Lord!" The person who appeared at the crucial moment was none other than the Palace Lord, Qi Yefeng. When Nye Tian and Shui Wushuang were fighting, someone had already informed Qi Yefeng. Qi Yefeng rushed over as soon as he heard the news. It seemed that he was not too late. Qi Yefeng was an overgod, so it was easy for him to neutralize the attacks from Nye Tian and Shui Wushuang. Nye Tian, Shui Wushuang, what are you two doing? Qi Yefeng frowned and roared. In this grand competition of the 12 shrines, Nye Tian and Shui Wushuang were the two strongest people in the Red Moon Divine Palace. If Qi Yefeng had not arrived in time, both of them would have been injured. If that was the case, the Red Moon Divine Palace would be finished. Palace Lord, Nye Tian and I killed my father. This is our private matter. Please don't interfere. Shui Wushuang's eyes flickered slightly. She took a step forward and was about to attack again. How dare you? Qi Yefeng roared. I have already told you that no matter how big the matter is, it can only be resolved after the grand competition of the 12 shrines. Did you not listen to a word I said? Shui Wushuang frowned. She knew that Qi Yefeng was really angry. She immediately stopped talking and continued to stare at Nye Tian coldly. Nye Tian let out a long sigh of relief. It was a very dangerous moment just now. He could feel that the golden whirlpool contained a very terrifying power. If Qi Yefeng had not appeared, he and Shui Wushuang would definitely have been injured. All right, let's go. Qi Yefeng looked down and said coldly. The grand competition of the 12 shrines had not yet started and the people of the Red Moon Divine Palace had already started fighting. This was not something to be proud of. The crowd seemed to be unwilling, but they immediately dispersed. Nye Tian, the matter between us is not over. You and I will not rest until one of us is dead. Shui Wushuang glanced at Qi Yefeng and knew that it was impossible to kill Nye Tian. He said coldly and turned around to leave. Qi Yefeng did not care about him. He suddenly looked down at Emo Qianjun and Jiu Qiansheng. He seemed to have sensed something and his face darkened. He said, "The grand competition of the 12 shrines is about to start. What are you doing here instead of cultivating?" Emo Qianjun and Jiu Qiansheng were stunned and did not know how to answer. Chapter 1452. Hearing Nye Tian's words, Qi Yefeng's eyes couldn't help but darken. Then, he said coldly, "I am the Palace Master of the Red Moon Divine Palace, and they are members of the Red Moon Divine Palace. Of course, it is up to me to decide whether to participate in the Divine Palace competition or not." "I'm sorry, Palace Lord." Nye Tian smiled faintly. A strange smile appeared at the corner of his mouth as he said, "You can't decide this." "What do you mean?" Qi Yefeng frowned and turned to look at Nye Tian. He had already tolerated Nye Tian, But this did not mean that Nye Tian could make decisions for him about the Crimson Moon Divine Palace. Nye Tian nodded slightly and said, "Sect Master, my two friends have to do something for me, so they have to leave right now." Nye Tian saw that Qi Yefeng was suspicious, so he let Mo Qianjun and Jiuqian Sheng leave the Red Moon Divine Palace openly. "Nye Tian, I know who you are, but don't push your luck." Qi Yefeng's face was gloomy. "Since they have joined the Red Moon Divine Palace, they must obey my arrangements. The Red Moon Divine Palace is not a place where they can come and go as they please." Qi Yefeng no longer had the demeanor of an elder. Instead, he was extremely cold. Nye Tian was already prepared for Qi Yefeng's sudden change in attitude, so he wasn't surprised. His expression didn't change in the slightest as he said indifferently, "Sect Master, you and I both know that joining the Crimson Moon Divine Palace is just a temporary decision. It's just a deal between us. I will help you keep the position of the Red Moon Divine Palace, and you will ensure that the Heaven Realm will continue to exist. But if you want to use this to keep my friends in the Red Moon Divine Palace, you are making a big mistake. I am telling you that Mo Qianjun and Jiuqian Sheng must leave today." After saying that, Nye Tian's face darkened, making him look very domineering. Qi Yefeng frowned and his expression suddenly became ugly. He did not expect that Nye Tian would be so strong in front of him, not afraid of him at all. "Nye Tian, are you threatening me?" Qi Yefeng spoke coldly. His eyes flashed with killing intent as he said, "Do you believe that I dare to kill you right now?" As the cold voice fell, Qi Yefeng released a murderous intent, directly enveloping Nye Tian. "Kill me? Just like how you killed your companions after you escaped from the Dark Sea prison?" Nye Tian laughed coldly and said, "Just like how you killed your companions after escaping from the Dark Sea?" "Huh." Qi Yefeng's face darkened again as he asked in surprise, "How did you know?" "I just happened to meet an old friend of yours." Nye Tian faintly smiled and said, "Mr. Lord, don't use these childish tricks to test me. I'm not a 3-year-old kid. I dare say that if I stood here right now, not only would you not dare to kill me, but you would also protect me. Am I right?" "You." Qi Yefeng's expression changed. He felt as if a huge stone was pressing on his chest, making him feel suffocated. The murderous intent just now was to test Nye Tian, to see if the latter was really strong or just pretending to be strong. Unfortunately, his trick was seen through by Nye Tian. "Mr. Lord, I have something on me that was left by Lord Yi Qinghai. If I die, he will know immediately. At that time, even if you flee to the ends of the earth, he'll still find you." Nye Tian said indifferently, the determination in his eyes enough to make people's hair stand on end. "Emperor Yi." Hearing Nye Tian mention Yi Qinghai's name, Qi Yefeng's eyes trembled, and sweat appeared on his forehead. It was because of Yi Qinghai that he was able to escape from the Dark Sea Black Prison. He knew better than anyone how terrifying Yi Qinghai was. Back then, there were more than a dozen people guarding the Dark Sea Black Prison. They joined forces to activate the Dark Prison Killing Array, but they couldn't stop Yi Qinghai. Instead, more than half of them were killed by Yi Qinghai. Qi Yefeng even felt that Yi Qinghai's strength was enough to compete with those old monsters in the upper realm. He originally thought that Nye Tian was just a little boy. Even though his status was high, he was not shrewd enough and would definitely be played by him. But he didn't expect that Nye Tian was so shrewd. He was completely at the level of an old monster that was hundreds of thousands of years old. He knew that Nye Tian had been reborn once, but his actual age was only more than 200 years old. In the realm, this age was just like a newborn calf. Seeing Qi Yefeng's reaction, Nye Tian knew that he had scared the latter. He then smiled faintly and said, "Mr. Lord, can my two friends leave now?" In fact, Yi Qinghai didn't leave anything on Nye Tian's body. If Nye Tian died, Yi Qinghai wouldn't know immediately. Who knew that Qi Yefeng would really believe Nye Tian's casual words? "Let them go." Qi Yifeng's expression was ugly. He finally said in a deep voice. Nie Tian smiled faintly and waved his hand to signal Mo Qianjun and Zhou Qianxing. The two immediately came to Nie Tian's side. Brother Mo, Brother Jiu, go to the Demon Dragon City first and find a person called Ming Hui. Nie Tian transmitted his voice to Mo Qianjun and Zhou Qianxing. Then, a wisp of flame gushed out of his palm and sent it to Mo Qianjun. He said, "This wisp of flame will help you find him." Okay. Mo Qianjun took the flame and nodded. Then, the two didn't stay any longer and directly left. Nie Tian looked at their backs and said in his heart, "Brother Mo, Brother Jiu, take care." He had asked Mo Qianjun and Zhou Qianxing to find Elder Ming first because he was afraid that Qi Yifeng would send someone to follow them. As long as Mo Qianjun and Zhou Qianxing found Elder Ming, they could stay there for a while before leaving. Then, no one would be able to find them. Qi Yifeng looked at the two disappearing figures with a gloomy expression. He didn't expect that he would be threatened by Nie Tian. "Palace Lord, don't worry. Our agreement is still valid. I will definitely take the first place of the Lesser God Chief." Nie Tian glanced at Qi Yifeng and smiled faintly. "I hope so." Qi Yifeng sighed. He didn't stay any longer and directly left. Nie Tian looked at Qi Yifeng's back and smiled faintly. He murmured, "I, Nie Tian, will definitely fulfill my promise. I hope that you, Qi Yifeng, won't go back on your word." After saying that, Nie Tian's figure flashed and landed in the small courtyard. Cher and Ed were still in shock, but they heaved a sigh of relief when they saw that Nie Tian was fine. "I'm sorry for making you worry again." Nie Tian looked at Cher and smiled faintly. Nie Tian's current battle prowess was no less than Cher's. At least, that was what he thought. Nie Tian. At this time, Cher suddenly thought of something and exclaimed, "Just now, there was a commotion in Sister Rushi's room. I think she's condensing her godhead." Condensing her godhead. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed slightly. He took a step forward and arrived outside Mo Rushi's room. Using his divine sense, he sensed a powerful energy surging inside Mo Rushi's body. It was a sign that she was condensing her godhead. Rushi's talent should be higher than Brother Mo and Brother Jiu's. Why is it that the latter two have already formed their godhead, but Rushi has only formed her godhead now? Nie Tian suddenly thought of this and asked with a frown. Boom! At this time, a sudden explosion came from the room. The entire room shook violently and collapsed in an instant. Endless flames gushed out. Chapter 1453. Rushi. Nie Tian could not help but exclaim in surprise when he saw Mo Rushi's body burning with blazing flames, like a flaming phoenix spreading its wings and about to take flight. Generally, when a martial artist condensed their godhead, they would be in a relatively calm state, and at most, they would release a burst of aura. Even when Nie Tian condensed his demonic aura, there was not much of a commotion. However, now that Mo Rushi was condensing her godhead, she caused such a big commotion, which made Nie Tian very puzzled. Nie Tian, is Sister Rushi all right? Cher stepped forward as if she sensed something and asked worriedly. Nie Tian shook his head slightly and didn't say anything. He spread his divine sense and sensed the aura inside Mo Rushi's body. To his surprise, he sensed an extremely violent power surging madly inside her, as if it was about to break out of her body. At this moment, Mo Rushi frowned slightly and moaned. Then, a blazing flame rose into the sky and rushed towards the horizon. Clang! The flame condensed into the shadow of a fire phoenix in mid-air and let out a clear and intense phoenix cry. Then, it turned into endless flames and disappeared into the void. Nie Tian frowned. He did not know what happened in Mo Rushi's body and why she released such a terrifying power. Nie Tian. Suddenly, Indra's voice sounded. As if he had sensed something terrible, his voice actually trembled. "Indra, what happened to Rushi?" When Nie Tian heard Indra's voice, he could not help but frown and his face became gloomy. She is indeed condensing her godhead. Sakra let out a long breath of impure air, and calmed down a lot. He said solemnly, however, at the same time as she condensed her godhead, the saint's power in her body released a powerful saint's power, which affected her phoenix soul. It may have triggered the legendary 9 divine phoenix transformations. 9 divine phoenix transformations? Nye Tian frowned slightly. He didn't understand what Sakra was saying at all. He had never heard of the 9 transformations of the divine phoenix. Sakra's soul shadow appeared in Nye Tian's mind. He stared at Emo Rushi with a burning gaze, and a strange expression appeared on his face as he said in a deep voice, "Phoenixes are also known as divine phoenixes. They are existences on par with the divine dragon clan. Rumor has it that the phoenix has the power of immortality in its body. As long as the phoenix can activate the power of immortality in its body, it can become an eternal existence that is even more terrifying than the divine dragon. However, the power of immortality is only a legend. No phoenix has ever been able to activate the power of immortality. It is said that the phoenix's nirvana rebirth is only a manifestation of the power of immortality. I've read in ancient texts that the only way to activate the power of immortality is to activate the 9 divine phoenix transformations. The 9 transformations of the divine phoenix is a sign that the power of immortality has been activated. Emo Rushi has the body of a sage. When she condensed her godhead, her body released a powerful sage energy. At the same time, she also fused with the Nirvana Sacred Heart, a powerful demonic flame. The sage energy and the Nirvana Sacred Heart released the power of life and activated the 9 divine phoenix transformations. After Sakra finished speaking, his eyes trembled incessantly. Even his soul phantom was shaking slightly. How could he not be excited to be able to witness the legendary 9 divine phoenix transformations with his own eyes? After listening to Sakra's explanation, Nye Tian was still in a state of half-understanding. He opened his mouth and asked, "Sakra, the 9 divine phoenix transformations won't endanger Rushi's life, right?" "Of course not." Sakra let out a strange cry and said, "The 9 divine phoenix transformations has been activated. The power of immortality in her body has been activated. This is a great thing for her." "That's good." Nye Tian let out a long sigh of relief. He looked at Emo Rushi with a burning gaze. He wanted to see for himself how terrifying the legendary 9 divine phoenix transformations were. At this moment, the blazing flames around Emo Rushi became even more violent. Waves of flames were released and turned into phoenix phantoms that soared into the sky, burning the heaven and earth. Soon, the commotion caused by the 9 divine phoenix transformations attracted a lot of people. Countless people looked at the phoenix phantoms that were constantly surging and disappearing in the sky. They were all dumbfounded and had no idea what was going on. Nye Tian sensed that many people were rushing over. He couldn't help but frown and murmur, "I hope Rushi can condense her godhead as soon as possible. If too many people are attracted, it will be troublesome." But then, Emo Rushi's body began to release even more violent flames. Not long after, the sky above her head was already filled with blazing flames. It extended into a sea of fire. Blazing flames surged like long snakes. It was extremely terrifying. Nye Tian looked at the sea of fire in the sky. It was actually thousands of meters wide and was still expanding. He couldn't help but frown. This commotion was too big. At this moment, Emo Rushi was like an endless whirlpool of flames. She was still constantly releasing phoenix flames. Nye Tian was shocked. He didn't know how long this situation would last. After a while, several figures with powerful auras appeared in the sky. At this moment, all of them were shocked and dumbfounded. "It's the Holy Judgment and the Palace Lords of the 12 Divine Palaces." Nye Tian looked at those figures and couldn't help but frown. He couldn't help but look worried. These people were all Lord God-level experts. If they could see that Emorushi had the body of a sage and had fused with the soul of the phoenix, it wouldn't be good for her. Among the experts that appeared, Nye Tian only recognized the Holy Judgment, the Heartbroken Prince, the Palace Lord of the Red Moon Divine Palace, Qi Yefeng, the Palace Lord of the Medicine King Divine Palace, Yao Chen, and the Palace Lord of the Heaven Sword Divine Palace, Jian Wu. He didn't know anyone else. However, at this moment, the Palace Lords of the 12 Divine Palaces were all present. They all looked at Emorushi in surprise. Who knew what they were thinking? These people couldn't possibly know that Emorushi had activated the 9 transformations of the Divine Phoenix and activated the undying power in her body. However, they could definitely tell that the girl in front of them was a peerless genius. Her future achievements were limitless. The Heartbroken Prince looked at the sea of flames above him and felt a burning sensation. It was as if he was hallucinating that he couldn't control the power in his body. Qi Yefeng, who is this girl? The Heartbroken Prince frowned and looked at Qi Yefeng. He pointed at Emorushi and asked. The other Divine Palace Lords also looked at Qi Yefeng and waited for him to speak. Lord Holy Judgment, I don't know who this girl is. She came from the 14th plane world of the Shocking God domain. She just joined the Red Moon Divine Palace not long ago. Qi Yefeng didn't know whether he was nervous or excited. His forehead was covered in sweat as he tried to explain in detail. He really didn't know anything about Emorushi. He only knew that Emorushi came with Nye Tian and was Nye Tian's wife. She was relatively calm and didn't speak much. He didn't know anything else about her. Qi Yefeng's attention was always on Nye Tian and Cher. He didn't pay attention to Emorushi at all. He didn't expect this girl to be so abnormal. Nye Tian, why are the people around you so abnormal? Qi Yefeng frowned and said angrily in his heart. Chapter 1454. The Heartbroken Prince had specifically asked Qi Yefeng about Nye Tian's background, so he knew that Nye Tian came from a plane world. He was very curious about how a warrior from a plane world could have such tyrannical strength. Lord Holy Judgment, this girl came with Nye Tian. She seems to be Nye Tian's wife. Qi Yefeng bowed and replied respectfully. Huh! The Heartbroken Prince was stunned. He couldn't help but curl his lips into a strange smile. Then, he said, Qi Yefeng, tell Nye Tian to come here. Yes. Qi Yefeng replied, but he felt strange. It seemed that the Holy Judgment was very interested in Nye Tian. He looked at Nye Tian and said, Nye Tian, the Holy Judgment wants you to come here. Nye Tian was below, but he heard everything that the Heartbroken Prince and the others had said. He didn't want to say much to these people, but the Heartbroken Prince's identity was too special. He couldn't refuse the invitation. Cher, you two stay here. I'll be right back, Nye Tian said to Cher. Then, he moved and came in front of the Heartbroken Prince and the others. He forced a smile and said, Lord Holy Judgment, what's the matter? When Nye Tian arrived, Jian Wuya, Yao Chen, and the other palace lords didn't look good. Jian Wuya's face was especially gloomy. Nye Tian had just defeated the genius swordsman of Sky Sword Divine Palace, Jian Chun, in front of everyone and humiliated Sky Sword Divine Palace. Of course, Jian Wuya hated him. However, because of the Heartbroken Prince's presence, Jian Wuya didn't dare to show his hatred too much. Next to Jian Wuya, a hunchbacked old man looked at Nye Tian with a complicated expression. No one knew what he was thinking. Nye Tian also noticed the hunchbacked old man. He looked like he was about to die, but his aura was the strongest among the 12 palace lords. This person should be a peak over God. Even the Heartbroken Prince is probably not his opponent, Nye Tian said to himself as he glanced at the old man. Nye Tian, is the lady below your wife? The Heartbroken Prince asked solemnly. Yes. Nye Tian nodded slightly and didn't say anything else. He had already made up his mind that he wouldn't answer anything the Heartbroken Breaker asked. He would just say that he didn't know. Nye Tian, this is the holy judge sent by the holy parliament. Watch your attitude. Seeing Nye Tian's indifferent attitude, Chi Yifeng's expression turned ugly and he reprimanded him. No matter what, Tian was from the Red Moon Divine Palace. If he disrespected him and made the holy judgment, the holy palace wouldn't be able to bear the consequences. It's fine. The heartbroken prince smiled faintly and waved his hand. He showed great tolerance and said, Nye Tian, do you know what happened? I don't. Nye Tian shook his head. Young Master Heartbroken was taken aback. He didn't expect Nye Tian's attitude to be so cold. Then, he smiled and said, I can sense a terrifying, blazing power in this lady's body. Do you know what it is? I don't. Nye Tian shook his head again. Afterwards, the heartbroken prince asked a few more questions, but Nye Tian didn't know anything. In the end, Nye Tian said, Lord Holy Judgment, even you don't know what happened to Rushi with your identity and strength. How would I know? The heartbroken prince's face froze. He was momentarily speechless. He could obviously tell that Nye Tian was brushing him off, but he couldn't force Nye Tian to answer in front of everyone. Nye Tian, I mean you no harm. I'm just a little curious. At that moment, the heartbroken prince suddenly transmitted his voice to Nye Tian and said, Actually, I can already tell that the power within Miss Rushi is the soul of the phoenix, right? Nye Tian's eyes flickered slightly, but he didn't answer. The heartbroken prince smirked and transmitted his voice again. Also, if I'm not mistaken, Miss Rushi's martial body is extremely terrifying. It should be the legendary first martial body of all time, the body of a sage, right? Nye Tian's eyes narrowed slightly when he heard the words, body of a sage. He never thought that the heartbroken prince would be able to tell. Body of a sage, the legendary first martial body of all time. It's an existence that can break through to the sage realm. The heartbroken prince sighed in his heart. He then transmitted his voice to Nye Tian and said, Don't worry, I know you want to protect Miss Rushi. I'll keep this a secret for you. However, there are too many experts in this world. I'm not the only one who can tell that she has the body of a sage. It's impossible for you to protect her with your current strength. At this point, the heartbroken prince seemed to recall something. A hint of seriousness appeared in his eyes. She's my wife. I'll protect her with my life. Nye Tian looked at the heartbroken prince and transmitted his voice with a determined gaze. The heartbroken prince looked at Nye Tian and could not help but tremble when he sensed the determination in the latter's eyes. He seemed to see the shadow of a person in Nye Tian, and that was himself. Once upon a time, he had also said that he would protect the woman he loved, Ren Jinchan, with his life. However, Ren Jinchan had now entered his reverse scale, and it was getting deeper and deeper. In an instant, the heartbroken prince recalled many things. His expression turned serious. When Nye Tian saw the heartbroken prince's reaction, he vaguely guessed that the latter must be thinking about the woman called Ren Jinchan. Lord Holy Judgment. However, at this moment, a very discordant voice was heard. The hunchbacked old man seemed to have discovered something. His eagle-like eyes flickered as he said, According to my observation, this woman's martial body is very special. It should be the legendary first martial body of all time, the body of a sage. Nye Tian was stunned. He suddenly looked at the hunchbacked old man. He did not expect the latter to also notice the body of a sage and to say it out loud in front of everyone. Body of a sage. The other palace masters were stunned and exclaimed in unison. These people were experts who had lived for tens of thousands of years or even hundreds of thousands of years. One could imagine how rich their experience was. Even if they did not understand the first martial body of all time, they must have heard of it. How could they not be surprised when they heard the hunchbacked old man say that Mo Rushi had the body of a sage? The heartbroken prince was stunned. He then looked at the hunchbacked old man and said in a deep voice, Palace Master Lai Yun, You even know about the body of a sage. You're really knowledgeable. This hunchbacked old man was none other than the palace master of the cloud-splitting divine palace, Lai Yu. With the shrewdness of the heartbroken prince, he naturally understood the reason why Lai Yu directly mentioned the body of a sage. It was obvious that he was revealing this news to the others. By doing so, he was clearly putting Mo Rushi in danger. At this moment, the other palace master's eyes changed slightly. They inadvertently looked at Mo Rushi with unconcealable passion in their eyes. Who wouldn't want the first martial body of all time? This person is the palace master of the cloud-splitting divine palace. Nie Tian looked at Lai Yu with a terrifyingly gloomy expression. This person obviously had bad intentions by mentioning the body of a sage in front of everyone. At this moment, Lai Yu glanced at Nie Tian and laughed. He said, "I'm really sorry. The body of a sage should be this lady's secret. I really shouldn't have said it." Chapter 1455. Nie Tian looked at Lai Yu with a gloomy face. This old man was too cunning. His words undoubtedly confirmed the fact that Mo Rushi had the body of a sage. Nie Tian was furious at the moment, but he couldn't do anything to Lai Yu. His strength was too weak to pose a threat to Lai Yu. It seems that this girl really has the legendary body of a sage. Jian Wuya suddenly laughed. At that moment, Jian Wuya suddenly laughed. He looked at Lai Yu and said, "Palace Master Lai Yun, I wonder if this lady's sage body or your disciple's thousand clouds dark body is stronger?" Nie Tian's eyes narrowed slightly. He immediately understood that Lai Yu was Luo Xian's teacher. This Lai Yu must have known something about Nie Tian and Luo Xian, which was why he mentioned Mo Rushi's body of a sage. Heaven Sword Palace Master, although the Thousand Cloud Dark Body is one of the 4 ancient taboo bodies, compared to the number 1 martial body, it can only be compared to a crow to a phoenix, a loach to a dragon. It is no exaggeration to say that the potential of the Thousand Cloud Dark Body is less than 1% of the body of a sage. Lai Yu smiled faintly and said playfully. He highlighted the horror of the body of a sage to arouse others' interest in the body of a sage. However, he was right. The Thousand Cloud Dark Body was indeed far inferior to the body of a sage. The body of a sage could nurture the power of a sage. As long as a martial artist's strength reached the peak of the god realm, they could naturally advance to the sage realm. This kind of potential, of course, was not comparable to the Thousand Cloud Dark Body. The body of a sage is so terrifying. The other palace masters were shocked. In addition to the passion in their eyes, there was also a touch of coldness. Now that Mo Rushi was a member of the Red Moon Divine Palace, if she grew up in the future, it would be incredible. Red Moon Palace Master, it seems that the Red Moon Divine Palace is going to shine in the grand competition of the 12 shrines. Medicine King Palace Master Yao Chen smiled faintly and said playfully. The Red Moon Divine Palace first had Nie Tian, and then there was a body of a sage. From the looks of it, it was indeed very powerful. What are you talking about, Palace Master Medicine King? Our Red Moon Divine Palace has always been at the bottom of the 12 divine palaces. This time, as long as we can no longer be at the bottom and keep our position as a divine palace, it will be fine, Qi Yefeng said cautiously with an embarrassed expression. How could he not feel that the Red Moon Divine Palace had become the target of public criticism because of the sage body? The Crimson Moon Palace Master is too humble. Yao Chen let out a strange laugh. He then turned to Nie Tian and said, I heard that there is a swordswoman by your side. Although she only possesses early-stage low-god strength, she defeated the outer elder of my divine palace of medicine kings, Zhang Qinzong, with a single strike of her sword. Presumably, this swordswoman is also a member of the Crimson Lunar Divine Palace. That's impossible, right? Qi Yefeng stared blankly for a moment before replying. An outer elder of the Palace of Divine Medicine King possesses at least mid-god strength. How could an early-stage low-god defeat him? Palace Lord of Medicine King must be joking. The other palace lords also laughed, thinking that Yao Chen was joking. Zhang Qinzong personally told me about it. Moreover, the people of the Azure Sun Palace and the Icy Cold Palace were also present that day. How could I joke about such a matter? Yao Chen's face darkened. He then looked at the two old men behind him. What the Palace Lord of Medicine King said is true. There is indeed such a swordswoman. The two old men stepped forward and said in unison. They were the Azure Sun Palace Lord and the Icy Cold Palace Lord. They had also heard from their subordinates that Sher had defeated Zhang Qinzong with a single strike. Such a thing really happened. The other palace lords were stunned. They then said in shock, she defeated a mid-god expert with early-stage low-god strength. Her talent in swordsmanship is too terrifying. She is indeed powerful. Lai Yu stepped forward and said in a deep voice, if what the Palace Lord of Medicine King said is true, then this woman's talent in swordsmanship is definitely above Luo Zian and Jian Qiu. The other palace lords were flabbergasted. They didn't expect Lai Yu to give such a high evaluation. It should be known that Luo Zian and Jian Qiu were the most popular candidates for the first place of Low God Chief in the grand competition of the 12 Shrine. At this time, the way the others looked at Qi Yefeng changed slightly. The previous contempt turned into suspicion and even jealousy. The appearance of so many heaven-defying existences in the Red Lunar Divine Palace instantly became the focus of everyone's attention. Qi Yefeng looked embarrassed because he didn't know about these things. Nie Tian's expression was also ugly at this moment. He didn't want Mo Rushi and Sher to attract other people's attention. But things didn't go as he wished. Mo Rushi and Sher had already become the focus of everyone's attention. Everyone, look! At this moment an exclamation sounded. The Azure Sun Palace Lord seemed to have discovered something and looked up at the sky. Everyone looked up and saw that the sea of fire in the sky was getting bigger and bigger. It almost covered the sky above everyone's head. The sea of fire stretched for tens of thousands of meters and was still expanding. It seemed like it was going to cover the entire Red Lunar mountain range. This is too terrifying. Everyone's eyes trembled violently and their expressions became extremely shocked. A person's body could actually release such a huge sea of fire. This was too terrifying. Nie Tian frowned and couldn't help but look at Mo Rushi. He found that the latter was still releasing the fire phoenix flames and had no intention of stopping. Sakura, how can the divine phoenix 9 transformations be so terrifying? Will the power in Rushi's body be exhausted? Nie Tian frowned slightly and couldn't help but look worried. Don't worry. The greater the power displayed by the divine phoenix 9 transformations, the stronger the immortal power in Mo Rushi's body. This little flame is nothing to her. Shi Tian chuckled, appearing to be very excited. Palace Lords! At this moment, the heartbroken prince looked at the sea of fire above his head and suddenly took out the sacred assembly jade token. The 12 palace lords immediately bowed and looked solemn as they waited for the heartbroken prince to speak. As the holy judgment, I order everyone to not let anyone near this sea of fire or Miss Rushi. If anyone dares to disobey this order, wait for the holy assembly's judgment. The heartbroken prince said sternly. The 12 palace lords were stunned. They didn't know why the heartbroken prince would give such an order, but they didn't dare to disobey and agreed in unison. Nie Tian was also stunned. He didn't expect the heartbroken prince to help him again. Nie Tian, my identity as the holy judgment is only effective during the grand competition of the 12 shrines. After this period, my identity will be invalid. The heartbroken prince glanced at Nie Tian and said telepathically, "This is as far as I can help you. You'll have to rely on yourself to protect Miss Rushi's safety." "Thank you." Nie Tian looked at the heartbroken prince and bowed to express his gratitude. He was just worried that someone would be unable to resist the temptation of a sage's body and secretly attack Mo Rushi. These people were all Lord-level powerhouses. Any one of them was not something that Nye Tian could resist. He couldn't ask Qi Yefeng to protect Mo Rushi at all times. With the Holy Judgment's order, at least Mo Rushi would be safe during the grand competition of the 12 shrines. Chapter 1456. 3 days later, Nye Tian stood in a small courtyard and looked at the sea of fire above him with a shocked expression. He murmured, "I wonder how long this situation will last?" Mo Rushi's situation remained the same for the past few days. Phoenix flames were still surging out of her body. At this moment, the sea of fire had spread for hundreds of thousands of meters and covered the entire Scarlet Moon mountain range. Everyone in the Scarlet Moon Divine Palace was in a panic. They were worried that the sea of fire above them would accidentally fall and destroy the entire Scarlet Moon mountain range. It should be over soon. Indra's voice sounded in his mind, but he sounded very uncertain. At this moment, even Indra was shocked. He didn't expect the immortal energy in Mo Rushi's body to be so terrifying. It had just been activated, but it could easily destroy the entire Scarlet Moon mountain range. If it was completely activated, it would be enough to destroy the world. At this time, Cher suddenly came to Nye Tian's side and said cautiously, "Nye Tian, I feel that Sister Rushi has condensed a godhead in her body. It seems that the sea of fire has stopped increasing and is slowly flowing back into her body." Nye Tian was taken aback. Then, he examined Mo Rushi with his divine sense and found that she already had a godhead. Could it be that Rushi's godhead is also not an ordinary godhead? Nye Tian was stunned for a moment and said in his heart. He carefully sensed Mo Rushi's aura and found that the latter's body was no longer surging with flames. Instead, she was absorbing the sea of fire in the sky. Nye Tian couldn't help but feel puzzled. He looked up at the sky and invisible holographic divine runes surged out like a surging tide, carefully sensing the sea of fire. Puzzled, Nye Tian looked up into the sky. Invisible divine patterns surged out like raging tides as he carefully sensed the sea of flames. Nye Tian was shocked when he noticed this. Wouldn't such a huge sea of fire absorb the divine power of the entire Scarlet Moon mountain range? When Nye Tian realized this, his face was filled with shock. Such a huge sea of fire, wouldn't it mean that the entire Crimson Moon mountain range was going to be sucked dry? The Scarlet Moon Divine Palace was located in the Scarlet Moon mountain range, and it contained a very rich divine power. The sea of fire released by Mo Rushi absorbed an unknown amount of divine power. It was likely that many people would spend hundreds or thousands of years to absorb as much divine power as she did. Boom! Right at this moment, the sea of fire in the sky suddenly trembled violently. Following which, a pillar of fire gushed out and spun crazily, turning into the phantom of a fire phoenix that rushed toward Mo Rushi. The fire phoenix spun downwards like a hurricane. It immediately stirred up the sea of flames, forming a huge pillar of flames that pierced through the heavens and earth. It was extremely terrifying. Nye Tian was taken aback for a moment before he came to a realization. The sea of flames seemed to have absorbed enough spirit intent energy and was beginning to return to Mo Rushi's body. At that moment, the phantom of a fire phoenix descended and wrapped around Mo Rushi. Boundless flames began to surge towards Mo Rushi. In the blink of an eye, Mo Rushi turned into a flaming black hole and began to crazily absorb the flames of the fire phoenix. Boom! The huge flames spread down from the sky. The surrounding houses could not withstand the impact of the flames and were directly submerged in the waves of fire. Nye Tian and the others quickly retreated several thousand meters away. In the next moment, the sea of flames became extremely violent and crazily surged down. The fire phoenix outside Mo Rushi's body grew larger and larger. In an instant, it was already several hundred meters in size. When it spread its flaming wings, it was at least 1,000 meters long. The aura of flames in the air became more and more intense. It was as if the heavens and earth were about to be set ablaze. Nye Tian could feel the blazing flames rushing towards him. He couldn't help but retreat again. The power of the flames was too terrifying. If an ordinary lower god were to come within 100 meters of it, they would most likely be burned alive. The speed at which the fire phoenix absorbed the sea of flames was extremely fast. In just a moment, the sea of flames in the sky had been completely absorbed. The body of the fire phoenix had also reached several thousand meters in size. Clang! Right at this moment, the fire phoenix let out an intense phoenix cry. Immediately after, it turned into pure flames and surged into Mo Rushi's body. Everything happened in an instant. By the time Nye Tian and the others reacted, the fire phoenix had already disappeared. The sea of flames in the sky had also disappeared. The heavens and earth had returned to normal, as if nothing had happened. However, Nye Tian could clearly feel that the divine intent power in the air had become much lesser. It was hard to estimate how much divine intent power Mo Rushi had absorbed through the 9 transformations of the divine phoenix. Rushi! Seeing that Mo Rushi had regained her composure, Nye Tian shouted. Immediately after, he moved his body and came to the ladder's side. Mo Rushi sat quietly with her legs crossed. Her aura was calm and steady. There was nothing unusual about her. At this moment, Mo Rushi opened her eyes. The moment she raised her head, 2 balls of blazing flames surged in her eyes and suddenly shot out. Nye Tian reacted quickly and dodged to the side. Boom! Boom! The 2 balls of flames shot out like arrows and bombarded 2 giant rocks tens of thousands of meters away. 2 muffled sounds could be heard. The 2 giant rocks actually melted and disappeared. Seeing this, Nye Tian couldn't help but gasp. Fortunately, he reacted in time. Otherwise, he would have been seriously injured. After Mo Rushi advanced to the godly state, the fire phoenix flames in her body became even more domineering. It actually melted the giant rocks tens of thousands of meters away. Nye Tian, are you alright? Mo Rushi stood up. Her eyes had returned to normal, but she was extremely nervous. I'm fine. Nye Tian smiled faintly. Of course, he knew that Mo Rushi had just awakened such a powerful power. She still couldn't control it perfectly. He specially observed Mo Rushi's eyes. They were much brighter than before, and there was a faint, terrifying power surging in them. It seemed that the 9 transformations of the divine phoenix had given Mo Rushi some kind of special ability. Sister Rushi, you advanced to the godly state. At this moment, Cher also walked over with a face full of joy. Cher. Mo Rushi smiled. Seeing that Nye Tian and Cher had returned safely, she was very happy. Rushi, do you feel any discomfort anywhere? Nye Tian secretly sensed Mo Rushi's body. He didn't find any abnormalities, but he was still a little worried. I'm fine. Mo Rushi smiled faintly and said, I feel that my strength has increased a lot. Other than that, there's nothing else. That's good. Nye Tian nodded slightly, completely relieved. He could feel that Mo Rushi's godhead was very powerful, and it seemed to be even more terrifying than his devil yuan. That kind of surging vitality was something that even his devil yuan couldn't compare to. The legendary immortal power is indeed terrifying, Nye Tian thought to himself, feeling happy for Mo Rushi from the bottom of his heart. He even felt that Mo Rushi's current battle strength might be even more terrifying than his. Chapter 1457. Divine Phoenix Saint Essence. When he said these 4 words, Sakra's entire body trembled slightly. The Divine Phoenix Saint Essence was the same as the Devil Essence. It was not an ordinary godhead, but an immortal godhead. It contained a strong power of immortality. In other words, even if Mo Rushi's physical body was destroyed, her godhead was immortal. Her divine consciousness could not be erased unless a saint intervened. Sakra had never expected that Mo Rushi's Divine Phoenix 9 transformations would be the Divine Phoenix Saint Essence. Currently, the Divine Phoenix Saint Essence was much stronger than Nye Tian's Devil Essence. However, the divine phoenix saint essence could not fuse with the power of the origin. If Nyetian could fuse the devil essence with one or even several kinds of power of the origin, the devil essence would be stronger than the divine phoenix saint essence. Sakura did not tell this to Nyetian. Instead, he kept it to himself. At this moment, Nyetian only knew that Emo Rushi had condensed a powerful godhead. However, he did not know that the latter's godhead was the immortal divine phoenix saint essence. Emo Rushi had condensed her godhead and ascended to the godly state. Her strength had increased qualitatively. However, Nyetian did not intend to let her participate in the grand competition of the 12 shrines. Of course, he would not let Cher participate either. Emo Rushi and Cher had already attracted a lot of attention. If they participated in the grand competition of the 12 shrines, they would undoubtedly become the center of attention. This was something that Nyetian did not want to see. The next few days were very peaceful. In order to prepare for the upcoming grand competition of the 12 shrines, Nyetian cultivated alone in his room. In a few days, he had a deeper understanding of the spirit intent power and the sword pattern realm. His strength had also increased. At this moment, Nyetian sat cross-legged in his room. His divine consciousness entered the chaotic original coffin. The 9 extreme chaos beast was sleeping in the chaotic original coffin. To little 9, sleeping was cultivation. Nyetian sensed the 9 extreme chaos beast's aura and murmured, "Little 9's aura is very strong now. It is not weaker than the 2-headed golden rock. Its true combat strength should be at the peak of the lower deity realm, or even stronger." Nyetian had not used the 9 extreme chaos beast in a long time. It was not that he did not want to use it, but he did not use it easily. When a martial artist reached the divine realm, many people would not easily use the original spirit. At this level of martial artists, other than absorbing the divine intent power and communicating with heaven and earth, their origin spirits were basically not used for battle. However, Nyetian knew that the origin spirit would grow stronger along with the martial artist's growth at any time. He also could not understand why there were so few deity realm martial artists who unlocked the potential of their primordial spirit. However, he would not underestimate the combat strength of the 9-top Chaos Beast. He guessed that if he used the 9-top Chaos Beast now, it would definitely be stronger than the Supreme Dragon Vein. At this moment, Nyetian's attention was not on the 9 Extreme Chaos Beast but on the original Star Soul Codex. The Star Soul Original Codex recorded all the Star Souls in the Star River. It had been a very long time since Nyetian had used his Astral Souls. Even if it was a 9th-ranked Astral Soul, it wouldn't be able to pose a threat to Immortal Realm experts. At this moment, Nyetian felt that his strength was slightly weaker. He thought that there might be Astral Souls above the original Star Soul Codex that were more terrifying than 9th-ranked Astral Souls. With a thought, the original Star Soul Codex slowly opened, and Nyetian directly skipped the Astral Souls in front. After 9th-ranked Astral Souls, there are indeed more powerful Astral Souls. Nyetian flipped to the page of 9th-ranked Astral Souls and realized that the original Codex could continue to be open. He could not help but tremble as he flipped to the next page. There were a few big words written on it. Original Star Soul Codex, Divine Armor Scroll, God-ranked Astral Souls. Nyetian's eyes trembled as he eagerly flipped to the next page. When he saw the 4 Astral Souls, his face was full of joy. The 4 Astral Souls were a pair of wings, a ball of flames, a golden armor, and a shield. Astral Soul Wings, Astral Soul Flame, Astral Soul Armor, Astral Soul Shield. When Nyetian saw the small words below the 4 Astral Souls, a voice rang in his mind, Divine Armor Scroll. Nyetian frowned as he was puzzled for a moment. But soon after, he understood. The original Star Soul Codex only had these 4 Astral Souls. This was a set of Astral Souls that were similar to weapons and equipment. When used at the same time, It would greatly increase his battle prowess. Nye Tian's divine sense scanned the 4 astral souls and immediately knew that the divine armor scroll would become stronger as his strength increased. In other words, the stronger his strength, the more power the divine armor scroll could unleash. Very good. Understanding this point, Nye Tian couldn't help but smile and said, with the divine armor scroll, my chances of becoming the champion of the lesser gods will be even higher. Nye Tian believed that with the support of the divine armor scroll, he would definitely be able to fight against Luo Xian, Jian Qiu, and the others. Next, with a thought from Nye Tian, the Star Soul Steel appeared. He wanted to inscribe the divine armor scroll, but to his surprise, the divine armor scroll directly appeared on the Star Soul Steel. The inscription was completed in an instant. Nye Tian's eyebrows furrowed. Then, he smiled and muttered to himself, it seems that the divine Star Soul bracelet is different from the Star Souls I've obtained before. The Star Soul tablet can directly sense the divine Star Soul bracelet without consuming star power. This was very good. It saved him the time to inscribe astral souls. Nye Tian suppressed the joy in his heart. His divine sense came out from the primal chaos origin coffin, stood up, and walked out of the room. Tomorrow was the day the grand competition of the 12 shrines would begin. Before that, Nye Tian still had one more thing to do. Big brother Nye Tian. Nye Tian walked out of the courtyard and ran into Ed. The latter grinned, seemingly excited. Ed, have the people from the Wang clan arrived? Nye Tian nodded and asked. A few days ago, Nye Tian had secretly asked Zhao Zi to find the father and daughter of the Wang clan. Ed had also followed Zhao Zi. They're here. They're waiting for big brother Nye Tian. Ed smiled and led the way. After a while, Nye Tian and Ed came to a hidden courtyard. As expected, they saw Zhao Zi, Wang Qianyuan, and the others. Mr. Nye Tian, I've brought the people from the Wang clan. Zhao Zi bowed slightly when he saw Nye Tian, appearing very respectful. Thank you, Lord Zhao. Nye Tian nodded and expressed his gratitude. Mr. Nye. Wang Qianyuan was very excited to see Nye Tian again. The latter hadn't appeared for such a long time that he thought the latter had forgotten about them. City Lord Wang, how is Miss Hao Lin? Nye Tian took a step forward and went straight to the point. When Wang Qianyuan heard Nye Tian mention Wang Haolin, his face suddenly became solemn. He let out a long sigh and said, Haolin suddenly fell into a coma a few days ago. She hasn't woken up yet. I'm afraid she's at the end of her life. Take me to see her. Nye Tian's eyes narrowed. He didn't expect the situation to be so serious. His face darkened and he signaled Wang Qianyuan to lead the way. Not long after, Nye Tian came to a small room and immediately felt a powerful desolate power. Ed, bring the desolate stone here. Nye Tian sensed that Wang Haolin's breath was very weak. He said to Ed and then directly entered the room. Inside the room, Wang Haolin was lying on a small bed. Her whole body was releasing a terrifying desolate power. The room was filled with an extremely strong death qi. Desolate ancestor, whether we can save her or not depends on you, Nye Tian said inwardly. A godhead appeared in his palm. It was the godhead that imprisoned the desolate ancestor. With a thought, Nye Tian slightly weakened the godhead's power. Chapter 1458. Inside the room, the desolate ancestor's surprised voice came from the godhead. Desolate ancestor, this is the person with the physique of desolation I told you about. Nye Tian didn't beat around the bush, getting straight to the point. Nye Tian, you bastard! The desolate ancestor suddenly reacted, roaring at the top of his lungs. You trapped me inside the godhead and forced me to endure endless pain. One day, when I come out, I'll definitely… Shut up! Before the desolate ancestor could finish, Nye Tian roared, interrupting him with a cold tone. Desolate ancestor, this girl is in danger. I asked you to speak to save her, not to scold me. His voice was cold and domineering. Save her? The desolate ancestor sneered as if he heard a joke. Smelly brat, you played dirty tricks on me. You trapped my soul, and now you want me to save her for you? There's no such thing as a free lunch in this world. Want to make this ancestor save people, you better give up on this idea early. The fifth ancestor had been trapped inside the godhead for the past few days, screaming and screaming, but Nye Tian ignored him. Now that he was asked to speak, it was to save the girl. How could he not be angry? Duan Huangwu, I'll ask you one more time, are you going to save her or not? Nye Tian didn't have time to waste with the desolate ancestor. His face darkened cold. No. The desolate ancestor was resolute. No matter what you say, I won't save her. Fine. The corner of Nye Tian's lips curled into a sinister smile. Then prepare to be trapped inside the godhead forever. No matter how strong your soul is, it will disappear in a few years. There will no longer be a desolate ancestor in this world. With these words, Nye Tian sent a wisp of his divine sense into the godhead in an attempt to completely seal the desolate wildness patriarch. Smelly brat, what are you doing? The desolate ancestor panicked, screaming, I'll save her, I'll save her. He just wanted to complain, but who knew that Nye Tian would be so ruthless? How could the barren ancestor not understand the situation he was in? Nye Tian was giving him a chance to save the others. Why didn't you say so earlier? Nye Tian smiled faintly, and his expression instantly brightened up. Patriarch Desolate went blank for a moment before realizing that he had been intimidated by Nye Tian again. Brat you! He was the barren desolate ancestor, but he had repeatedly suffered at the hands of Nye Tian. He couldn't understand why. Barren ancestor, cut the crap and get ready to save them. Nye Tian's expression grew serious as he looked at Wang Haolin. At this moment, Wang Haolin's aura was extremely weak. It was intermittent and could disappear at any time. Her face was very old, as if she had lived for hundreds of thousands of years and was about to reach the end of her life. It was hard to believe that this was a teenage girl. Nye Tian released some restrictive force, and the barren ancestor barely managed to squeeze out a strand of soul force. Nye Tian had branded the godhead with his soul mark. If the barren ancestor dared to make any strange movements, his soul would be destroyed in an instant. The barren ancestor's soul force condensed into a faint shadow. His gaze swept over Wang Haolin, but he didn't speak for a long time. Can you save her? Nye Tian asked, his eyes darkening when he saw the barren ancestor's reaction. This girl indeed has the desolate physique. Her body has been corroded by the power of desolation for years, and she's very weak now. It'll be very difficult to save her, the barren ancestor muttered. Inwardly, he was shocked. He had seen other people with the desolate physique, but none of them were as strong as Wang Haolin. Even he himself wasn't as strong as Wang Haolin's desolate physique. What a pity, what a pity! The barren ancestor sighed inwardly. If Wang Haolin had been born hundreds of thousands of years ago and joined the Barren Heaven sect, the Barren Heaven sect would have been one of the strongest forces in the 9 great domains. Difficult means that she can still be saved, right? Nye Tian nodded slightly. I'll leave this girl to you. If she dies, prepare to spend the rest of your life inside the godhead. Brat you! The barren ancestor was stunned. He thought he was unreasonable enough, but Nye Tian was even more so. Big brother Nye Tian, the desolate stone is here. Ed walked over with the desolate stone on his back. All right. Nye Tian agreed and had Ed place the desolate stone in the room. He said, Barren ancestor, I'll leave the rest to you. Don't play any tricks. Nye Tian and Ed took 2 steps back, and at the same time, weakened the godhead's confinement even more. The barren ancestor turned to look at Nye Tian, a hint of fear in his eyes. In the next moment, the barren ancestor didn't say anything else. He began to circulate the desolate stone's energy. Immediately, waves of pure desolate energy flowed out, slowly entering Wang Haolin's body. Nie Tian was shocked as he sensed the changes in the desolate stone. At this moment, the desolate energy released by the desolate stone contained traces of life force. It seemed like the barren ancestor had stimulated the life force devoured by the desolate energy for Wang Haolin to absorb. The barren ancestor was indeed a peak expert from several 100,000 years ago. This kind of method was indeed shocking. With the influx of the power of desolation, Wang Haolin's aura gradually stabilized. At the same time, her appearance also underwent a very strange change. It was as if she had returned to her youth. Slowly, she turned from an old woman to a young girl. Upon seeing this, Ed couldn't help but exclaim, "Big brother Nie Tian, that old woman's appearance has changed." "Ed, she's just a little girl," Nie Tian said with a plain smile. "She's probably younger than you." Ed was taken aback. His small eyes widened and he had a surprised expression. After a while, Wang Haolin completely returned to normal. Her aura stabilized and her appearance returned to normal. On the surface, she looked no different from an ordinary girl. All right, the desolate energy in her body has been suppressed. The barren ancestor's soul trembled, then immediately returned to the godhead. If you want her to recover completely, you must cultivate the ninth heaven desolation method. With such a desolate body, you'll teach her the ninth heaven desolation method, right? Nie Tian asked with a smile. The ninth heaven desolation method is the desolate sky sex martial skill. It has never been taught to outsiders. The barren ancestor said unhappily. If the little girl wants to cultivate the ninth heaven desolation method, she must first become my disciple. No problem. Nie Tian raised an eyebrow and agreed. Not everyone had the chance to become the disciple of an ancient god realm expert. Her body can still be weak. Let her rest for a few days and eat more divine elixirs, the barren ancestor said, then disappeared into the godhead. Activating the stone of desolation was a huge burden on him. It would take a long time for him to recover. Ed hadn't figured out what was going on. He walked over with a curious expression and came to Wang Haolin's side. He clicked his tongue and said, "This little girl is pretty." Chapter 1459. Ah! Ed was frightened by Wang Haolin. He screamed and stepped back, almost falling down. "Who are you? Why are you in my room? Get out!" Wang Haolin covered her face with her hands and shouted. "You look very beautiful. Why can't I look?" Ed looked innocent. He looked back at Nie Tian in confusion. "Bastard! You are lying to me. You are all lying to me!" Wang Haolin shouted. She curled up in the corner of the bed and shivered. Nie Tian shook his head when he saw this. It seemed that this girl had experienced something terrible. It was cruel for a girl to have that kind of appearance at the age of 10. "Ms. Wang, please calm down. You've recovered. You look very beautiful now," Nie Tian said lightly. Then, he opened the door and signaled for Wang Qianyuan and the others to come in. Wang Qianyuan was excited when he heard the movement in the room. He stepped into the room. When he saw that Wang Haolin had already woken up and that her appearance had undergone a shocking change, he was completely dumbfounded. After a full 10 seconds, he reacted and actually burst into tears. "Haolin, my daughter, you've finally recovered." Wang Haolin endured the torture of the power of desolation every day. As her father, Wang Qianyuan was in more pain than her. Now that his daughter was finally cured, he couldn't suppress the excitement in his heart. "Father!" Wang Haolin subconsciously looked at Wang Qianyuan and shouted. Then, she looked at her arm. It was as white as snow and smooth as cream. It was no longer the withered bark from before. She immediately understood and said in a daze, "I'm really cured." Well, my daughter, you are really cured." Wang Qianyuan stepped forward. He was so excited that he couldn't control himself. After a long time, Wang Haolin finally calmed down. She couldn't help but look at Ed. She said in surprise, "You cured my illness?" Ed was stunned for a moment. Before he could say anything, Nie Tian laughed and said indifferently, "He saved you. Thank you for saving me." Wang Haolin's beautiful eyes flickered. She suddenly recalled the scene from before, and a blush involuntarily appeared on her face. Looking at Wang Haolin's bashful appearance, Yi was stunned and couldn't speak for a long time. Nie Tian's lips curled into a smile as he quietly left the room. Mr. Nie Tian. Zhao Zi was in the courtyard and had not left yet. When he saw Nie Tian coming out, he bowed and greeted. "Lord Zhao, what's the matter?" Nie Tian smiled. He didn't expect Zhao Zi to still be here. Zhao Zi let out an unnatural smile and said, "Mr. Nie Tian, tomorrow is the day the competition of the 12 shrines will begin. You don't know much about the rules of the tournament." "Then I'll have to trouble Lord Zhao to tell me." Nie Tian's eyes narrowed as he acutely sensed that Zhao Zi seemed to have something to ask of him. Zhao Zi bowed his head respectfully and said, "The grand competition of the 12 shrines is divided into 2 parts, the Heavenly Emperor Realm and the Lower God Realm. There is an age requirement for Heavenly Emperor Realm martial artists to be under 500 years old, and Lower God Realm martial artists to be under 1,000 years old." Then, Zhao Zi explained some of the rules of the tournament to Nie Tian in detail, and finally said, "Mr. Nie Tian, do you know what the reward for the Lower God Champion is?" "I don't know." Nie Tian shook his head slightly. Seeing the passion in Zhao Zi's eyes, he couldn't help but laugh and said, "Lord Zhao, you won't be interested in the reward, right? How would I dare to have such extravagant hopes?" Zhao Zi let out a hollow laugh. Then his face turned solemn and said, "This time, the Lower God Champion will get a piece of Mother Earth Stone." "Mother Earth Stone?" Nie Tian was stunned and asked, "What is that?" Mother Earth Stone, Nie Tian had never heard of it before. It sounded like a piece of stone, and he didn't know what use it had. "Mr. Nie Tian, Mother Earth Stone is a good thing. Legend has it that it is a divine stone that is hidden deep underground, and it can absorb the Mother Earth essence energy from the earth." Zhao Zi's eyes flickered as he explained solemnly. "Mother Earth essence energy?" Nie Tian was stunned again. He seemed to have heard Wang Fulin mention Mother Earth when he was introducing the Earth Silkworm Crystal, but he didn't know what Mother Earth was. Now that Zhao Zi mentioned Mother Earth again, Nie Tian couldn't help but be interested. Mother Earth essence energy is a very powerful energy that can stimulate the potential of a martial artist's martial body. Legend has it that it is the power source of the Earth attribute. As Zhao Zi spoke, his voice trembled slightly. Nie Tian frowned and his heart couldn't help but tremble. He had heard of the power source again. However, he still didn't know what the power source was. "Actually, I also don't know what the power source is. I've only heard from others that the power source is a kind of energy that can help martial artists break through to the Sage Realm," Zhao Zi said, and his eyes were filled with fascination. "Lord Zhao, could the Mother Earth Stone contain the power source?" Nie Tian's eyes flickered, and he couldn't help asking. "I don't know." Zhao Zi shook his head and said, "But I've heard from others that the Mother Earth Stone contains very powerful Mother Earth essence energy. As long as one absorbs a little bit of Mother Earth essence energy, it can help a martial artist raise his realm." At this point, the light in Zhao Zi's eyes dimmed a little, and he said, "I've been stuck at the early stage of Middle God for over 300 years, and I've never had any signs of advancing. If only I could absorb some Mother Earth essence energy." Nie Tian looked at Zhao Zi, and he couldn't help but smile. Even if he was a fool, he would understand that Zhao Zi clearly wanted to absorb some Mother Earth essence energy through Nie Tian to raise his strength. "Lord Zhao, you and I are friends, you don't have to do this." Nie Tian laughed and said, "I promise you, as long as I become the Lesser God Chief and obtain the Mother Earth Stone, I'll definitely let you absorb Mother Earth essence energy and help you raise your strength." "Thank you, Lord Nie Tian." Zhao Zi was slightly embarrassed, and he immediately bowed deeply to thank Nie Tian. He even changed the way he addressed him to Lord. Actually, Zhao Zi only said this to Nie Tian, and he didn't have much hope. He didn't expect the latter to really agree. If he was in Nie Tian's position, he would definitely pretend that he didn't know anything. After all, Nie Tian really didn't need to care about Zhao Zi. At this moment, Zhao Zi had the heart to go through fire and water for Nie Tian. After Nie Tian bade farewell to Zhao Zi, he quickly arrived at Emo Rushi and Cher's courtyard. Just as he arrived outside the courtyard, he suddenly felt a strange fluctuation in the void, and he couldn't help but frown. Immediately, Nie Tian activated his holographic divine veins, and his consciousness spread out. He actually saw a blurry figure hidden in the void, and he was looking at Emo Rushi and Cher from afar. It's him. Nie Tian frowned. Although the figure was blurry, he could still recognize it at a glance. This person was the Palace Master of Cloud-Shattering Divine Palace, Lai Yu.